It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of the Ramsey Dewey podcast. No, I'm not doing it at the gym. Instead, I recorded this one via Skype with Nguyen over at OG Fitness. Go check out his channel. You might not know about it, but it's a fantastic channel. And this podcast is 4 hours long because he was that interesting to talk to. If you don't have the time and you want to see some shorter clips, go over to the OG Fitness channel. He's posted a number of 4 or 5 minute segments of the podcast that are particularly interesting. Otherwise, pay attention, buckle up for the long run, and join us for this episode of my podcast. Now, quick sponsorship shout out to my sponsor, xmartial.com. Go check them out. Don't forget to use my code Ramsey10 for 10% off your entire purchase. That being said, on with the podcast.
All right, the recording has started. Let everyone know they are being recorded. I need to say that according to law or something. I don't know. Or
There's
common decency. There actually are laws in China. Yeah.
Well, I heard over there you could run over fools and as long as you make sure they're dead, you're okay, right?
Oh man, they actually started cracking down on that. So you probably heard about like what do they call it outside of China? The social credit systems. Like a lot of people say social credit system, but it's not one thing. It's like multiple separate independent agencies that keep track of various things. For example, traffic laws. In America, for example, they've got the Department of Motor Vehicles. They keep track of what you do on the road. So for a very long time in China, yeah, you were exactly right. If you had a traffic accident, it was cheaper to pay the fine for killing somebody on the road as opposed to paying their medical bills for the rest of their life if they were crippled. And so I had actually seen this before. I had actually seen people get run over, and then the person would stop, back up, run them over again to make sure they were dead and go on. And this comes off as shocking to a lot of Westerners who come from these countries with car culture, like America, where cars have been the norm, traffic laws have been the norm for a very long time. In China, however, it's cars are a fairly new thing. I mean, it's really just this modern generation that has had access to motor vehicles in large numbers. So, what this particular social credit system that follows traffic laws does is rewards people for good behavior on the road. For example, it rewards them for stopping for pedestrians. And that might seem like a given, like, well, of course you're supposed to stop for pedestrians. Well, yeah, in America, people know that. They've been doing it for generations. In China, it's a fairly new thing, because when I got here, the rules of the road went like this. Basically, if your vehicle was bigger and more threatening, you had the right of way. And so if you were a pedestrian, you had to play a live action game of Frogger, that old 1980s video game, to jump across the road and hope you didn't get squished. And now people will actually stop to you. They'll stop for you and let you cross at a crosswalk or a stoplight. They won't try to, murder you on the way. So progress, yes, there are laws in China now.
Okay, but I'm not too surprised in the sense that there's a lot of people in China.
Yes.
And things evolve pretty quick. Like you said before, maybe there wasn't a lot of cars. Now everybody has cars, and then it takes more time to re-educate and get people on the same page, so to speak, to do the same thing, to function in society, because there's just so many people. So I don't judge them for that at all. It's just it's just funny that they used to just run over people, and
yeah,
because it was cheaper.
It was not an uncommon thing, man. It was not an uncommon thing at all. But yeah, it's absolutely staggering. Like it's one thing to say 1.4 billion people. Like, people think they know what that means, but to actually understand how many 1.4 billion people is, it's staggering. Like the first time I stepped on a subway, like a metro train in Shanghai, it was mind blowing to me. It was a sea of humans as far as the eye could see, just packed in. I was like, it made me claustrophobic. I grew up in a very small town, a town with like 1,000 people and 20,000 cows, and seeing way more people than that, including the cows, just crammed into a subway car. That was a little overwhelming, and everyone around me is just like, this is normal. I was like, this isn't normal. This is weird. Ah, you know, it was that was one of the most unnerving experiences of my life, to be honest. But I'm so used to it now that going to a place with wide open spaces and low populations, it's like, wow, this is nice. This is different. This is peaceful.
How long you been in China now?
I've been here for 12 years. Man, I forgot to introduce you. So welcome to the Ramsey Dewey podcast. I forget what number we're on, 20 something, 30 something, 30 something, I think. We have our guest today, Nguyen from OG Fitness. Go check out his channel, please. It's an excellent channel, especially for gentlemen over the age of 40 who are interested in training. And that's something I wanted to talk to you about. We're both over 40, and a lot of people are shocked when they find out how old I am, because a lot of people think I'm like in my 20s or early 30s or something like that, because they conflate fitness with age. Like, if you are healthy, they think you're young, and if you're not healthy, they think you're old. Do you ever run into this issue yourself?
You mean when I tell people my age and they're
Yes.
surprised? Oh
Yeah.
yeah, all the time, all the time. Like when people find out I'm 42, they're like, no way, you're kidding me, get out of here, blah 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 blah. Some of them curse a little bit, and they think I'm lying. They're like, show me your ID and stuff like that. I'm like, then they're like, oh, it's because you're Asian. I'm like, well, maybe that's a small part of it. Like there is a genetic component to it, but I don't believe so. I believe that I just have a baby face. I don't have like a rough and tumble type of face, a square jaw. I don't got a beard. I can't grow one for my life. I tried, forget about it. So, so I look like a kid to begin with, and on top of that, like I've been working out pretty much my whole life, except for that little between 20 and 30, I was getting into a lot of trouble. So I
Mm.
that kind of fell off. That kind of was on the back burner at that time. But since I was born up until the age of 20, and then after that, from 30 up until now, I've been working out, man. I've been working out hard, and
Yeah.
it's because I enjoy it. So I think a lot of it I attribute to you know staying in shape, being healthy, working out, and yeah, that's it. That's a big part of it.
Yeah, man. Everybody wants a magic pill. Like, people have accused me of taking performance enhancing drugs, which I think is hilarious because, um,
I think that would actually age you faster, to tell
yeah,
you the truth.
yeah, yeah,
You
exactly.
know?
Because essentially you're creating hormone imbalances in your body. Like, I run into a lot of younger guys who, that first of all, they assume everybody in the professional fight game is on steroids, which is just, it's just patently absurd. It's not true. Everybody stronger than you is on steroids, is what everybody on the internet seems to say or think. But what a lot of people don't seem to realize is that the peak levels of human strength are achievable between the ages of 35 and 50 in adult human males. And this is shocking to most people because they are so used to seeing people between the ages of 35 and 50 giving up on life, being physically unfit, having pot bellies, beer guts, whatever you want to call them, and just not participating in the world of physical culture.
That's a surprise to me because I thought that like as a male, your physical peak is around 35. That was from what I gathered. But I think that you're much more well-read than I am, right? And you have a lot more
Yeah.
experience in martial arts. So I'm actually happy to hear that. 35 to 50. So I'm still like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because like I don't know if you noticed, but like my whole thing is that I'm going for a world title. I want to become a world champion in judo.
Okay.
Obviously, in my age category, in my division, right? So it's going to be
Yeah.
master, I don't know, 50, masters 10, whatever,
Okay.
but
So does judo have like the same age categories as Brazilian jiu-jitsu? Like masters is over 30, then masters I think 40 to 45 is like masters 3 and so on. Then masters 7 is like 50 to 60 or something like that.
I think so. I believe so. I'm not sure 100%, but masters does start at 30 years old. And then
Okay.
at 35, I think it's masters 2, and then after that, I think 40 it's masters 3, and then, but you could compete like there's like I've seen 80, 90-year-olds like on the internet competing in judo. So I mean, it's you could compete as long as you want, and nothing stops you from like competing with the 20-year-olds
Yeah.
if you
And that,
wanted to.
I know that shocks a lot of people because so many people, especially in the West, have not met a healthy 80-year-old man before. Like I told a story on my channel that just raised a lot of eyebrows, and people are like, I don't believe it. About a time I met a master of Tai Chi who was really physically fit. Like the guy could do backflips and he could do all kinds of gymnastic movements and hold his leg up over his head doing the splits. And I sparred with him and he actually beat me. He managed to throw me on the ground and catch me with submissions and things like this. And people are like, no way, that's impossible. Because I think what they're imagining is some dude in a nursing home hooked up to an oxygen tank or or a dialysis machine or something like that, because they've never met a physically fit older person before. Now, in China, it's a very different world because older people tend to stay active. They don't really have nursing homes here. It's not a thing. It's not part of the culture. And so old people are always out and about doing something. Generally in the morning they're doing Tai Chi or ballroom dance or just going on a walk or some sort of physical exercise. And they do this in the morning, they do it in the evening, and you always see the old people doing this. It's part of their culture. But it's part of the culture that's been lost on the younger generation. You don't see young kids doing that. Of course, they're in school or they're playing video games or whatever. But I imagine the next few generations in China, people are going to be telling these legends about healthy old people that existed once upon a time, and people will be like, "No way, no way! There were old people that could go for a walk in the park by themselves. Impossible." I don't know, but we have some really screwy ideas about age. This idea that we have to essentially become decrepit as we get older. So what would you
Yeah,
say are some of the biggest challenges that you come across with? Because you do online training with people, especially like people over 40, right?
yeah. I train a lot of people over 40,
Well,
but I do have like some younger clientele, like people who are in their 30s.
okay,
So like it's anywhere between 30 till 50, my clientele,
yeah,
approximately. And I like to train men mostly. That's who I like to deal with the most. But I'm not against training women either. I just find that women tend to be a little bit more emotional, so I got to be a little bit nicer.
yeah,
Whereas men, I could just be a little bit harder on them when I need to
yeah.
be. I'm still
It's
always
absolutely
kind,
true. It's
right?
absolutely true, man. I learned this trying to train my wife because my wife at first she was like, you know, you're a trainer, you're a fitness professional. Be my personal trainer. I was like, all right, do this, do that, whatever. And she started getting mad at me. I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, I don't want you to train me anymore. You're you're too mean, basically. I was like, man, you, you can't train women the same way as men most of the time because with a guy you can say, suck it up, buttercup, drop and do me 50, or drop and give me 50. What am I saying here? Um, and and guys will just do it because they've got this competitive urge. They don't want to look weak, and yeah, it's a different thing, man.
Yeah. So what was your question again regarding training difficulties
Oh yeah.
regarding
Well, what kind
for
of challenges have you run into? Not so much training older guys, but convincing older guys that they can train. Like, is this something that comes up?
You know what? Like a lot of them, when they find out like how old I am, that's when they're like shocked. And then when I tell them also, hey, and I'm also natural.
Yeah.
Because the thing is my profile pic, right? My like on IG and on Facebook, I'm there without my
Yeah,
shirt and
'cause
I'm
you got muscles and striations and
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. You know,
this
so I
look
look.
people associate with youth.
Hmm?
You got this look people associate with youth, right? Young and athletic.
Exactly. Exactly. So then, you know, when I tell them, hey, I'm actually natural and I'm 42, then they're shocked, you know. And then I explain to them, listen, it's very possible for you to get into really good shape at your age right now, you know. Like
Yeah,
it's not in the realm of impossible, of the impossible, so to speak. You know, it's just about doing certain things right and doing it long enough for it to work. That's it.
yeah,
There's no magic here. Like I'm not trying to sell. And I tell them it always takes about. When you ask me, well, how long is it going to take? I'm like, well, depends on where you're at. But you know, give it about a year or two, and I'll change you completely. But that's how long it's going to take. You know, 3 months it's a start, but it ain't gonna you ain't gonna look like me. You don't necessarily need to look like me, but you know, I always preach at least 15% body fat. That's my opinion on it. I think at 15, you know, you're looking good with clothes on, without your shirt on, and it's healthy. 10% is not for everybody because it's going to depend on genetics, in my opinion.
yeah.
Uh, and 10%, I mean, some people are able to stay lean easier than others because of their genes and how much muscle they have and all that. But 15 is a nice balance. If you want to get to 10 afterwards, we could work on that. But depending on where they're at, I like to get them down to 15, and then we'll reassess what they would like to do. If they want to take it further just to see how 10% actually looks like, okay, but
Yeah.
it's going to demand more sacrifice. It's going to take you more than what it took you to get to 15. You
Yeah.
know, so that, you know, and that in my opinion is the truth. It takes a year or two to change somebody completely, depending on how much body fat you need to lose, how much muscle you want to build. But it's
I'm
a
so
process,
glad you
you
brought
know.
that up. So glad you brought that up. Just last night, I was speaking with my wife. One of her coworkers um, posted this picture, this before and after picture of this radical 8-week transformation. And in both pictures, this dude's posing with his shirt off. And then the first one, okay, he's doing this thing everybody does in these before and after pictures. And the original picture, he's slouching, looking sad, sticking his gut out, bad lighting. Um, in the second picture, he's got his chest shaved, all oiled up, flexing, looking confident, side lighting so you can see all the striations. And I'm like, that dude's just flexing and posturing. And she's like, but I'm like, you don't experience radical body transformations in 8 weeks. You don't. There's no magic pill like that. I know everybody wants to do that, but it's a very popular way to sell fitness programs on the internet. It's a very popular way to get people excited, to make them think if you invest a minimum of time, this tiny little amount of effort will give you this massive result. And it's just simply not true. Just like you're saying, it takes some time. It takes a serious investment of time.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's the thing, right? Because there's a lot of well, people just trying to sell you you know, their program or some kind of supplements, you know, and they're full of it, unfortunately, you know, and they're just out there to get your money. But me, I'm like, no, it's going to take you about a year. Like it depends on where they're at. If they only have like 10 pounds to lose, then obviously it's not going to take a year. But if they want to build muscle on top of that, well, first of all, it's going to depend on genetics. Second of all, it's going to depend on like how hard you train. And
Yeah,
even then, like it depends on like at what stage you're at in your so-called bodybuilding evolution, right? Because when if you're a newbie, you could build more muscle quickly the first year, you know, newbie gains, right? But
yeah,
if it's been like if it's been a couple of years you've been training, you know, more over let's say 4 or 5 years now, and you're older now too, like that has an impact. So you know, there's we'll have to kind of work out hard and see what happens kind of thing, you know. Like you can't just build muscle, like put on 10 pounds of muscle in 3 months. There's a lot of people
yeah,
who claim that, and it's crazy, it's nonsense. It's like even with steroids, I think 10 pounds in 3 months. No, that's too much. That's too much. That's impossible.
Yeah, that's the newbie gains we're talking about. This is an interesting concept to me because you, like a person who doesn't train athletically, a person who doesn't lift, for example, when they learn correct lifting technique, like even if they don't put on any muscle, when they learn how to fix their posture and lift correctly, for example, doing the deadlift correctly, doing the squat correctly, it is alarming how their strength improves dramatically just from proper technique. And because essentially going from I can't even lift a bar to look, I can pull up actual weights now. This is amazing, right? What was I going to say? Let's talk about judo for a minute. I feel like we're going all over the place, but you practice judo. I know you made a video about you used to practice Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but you made a pretty concrete switch to judo specifically. Why that change?
Oh man, yeah. Okay. So, at 30 years old, that's when I started judo. Sorry, jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And so I did jiu-jitsu for 6 years. And then from there, what happened was that I lost my job.
Mm.
And at that time, I lost my job, and I'm like, I just bought a condo, and I was lucky that it actually passed. Like the bank, I got the loan before the bank found out that I lost my job because I applied a little bit ahead of time. So then I lost my job. I'm like, man, I can't afford BJJ anymore. You know, I gotta start like I gotta tighten up my belt and you know like be more careful with my expenses. So then, but at my BJJ club, what happened was that I had a teammate who was a judoka, and he was giving classes. He was giving classes. He was teaching at a judo club. So he told me, he kind of recruited me because he saw that. Well, I figure what I'm trying to get at is that we trained together, so he kind of knew like how I was in terms of physical skill and all that. And he's like, "Why don't you come and try judo?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to, man, but you know, like I just lost my job. I don't have any money." So he's like, "Hey, anyways, listen, I give the classes there, so you don't need to pay. Just come." And that's how I got into judo.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that was at yeah. And then because he wanted me, like he saw something in me, and he said, you'd be great at judo. Why don't you come train? And I'm like, well, I can't. I don't have money. He said, well, listen, it's just come and train, and you'll pay when you get a job or whatever, you know. And that's how it started. So I started judo at 36.
Huh. That's interesting because I think a lot of people tend to think of judo as a much more violent, high risk type of sport than Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I'm not sure it actually is. And I think it's just because people are afraid of falling. You know, the natural fear of falling. So many Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools, for example, say, "Oh, we can't start on the feet because takedowns are too dangerous," which I think is ridiculous. Because every jiu-jitsu tournament starts on the feet, even if you are a guard puller, even if that's your whole game plan, you need to learn how to do that starting from the feet because that's how tournaments start. Because if you don't even have the experience of pulling guard against a standing opponent, you're going to have a really hard time getting into the position you want in an actual competition. But that being said, you know, in judo, it's no secret you get tossed on the ground a lot, right? You need to know how to break fall, and there are potential risks involved. But in your experience, which do you think is more dangerous, judo or Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
Oh man, 100% judo.
Okay.
Usually people transition from judo to BJJ as they get older
Yeah.
because it's safer, right? Because you're on the ground, and so there's nowhere for you to fall, really. Like you could still get injured, of course, but I mean, you're on the ground. What's the worst that could happen? Like as long as you tap fast and you're properly warmed up, and you don't let the person crank on the submission, then technically you should be okay. But definitely judo, because judo, as you get older, like you know, a lot of kids when they start judo, well, they're kids, so they don't have a long way to go to fall down. And of course, kids are light also. They weigh nothing, so they could land on their head and they'll still be kind of okay because they're still malleable, they're still growing. You still have to be careful, of course, but you know, and kids
Yeah.
have no fear. They don't have that sense of you know, it's not a big deal for them to run around and fall. Whereas for an adult, like, man, falling, if you don't know, if you don't learn how to break fall properly, then yeah, you could get into trouble. And then from there, it's just that in judo, it's the knees and the shoulders.
Mm.
They get entangled a lot while you're standing up. And also in judo, it's because if you don't know how to accept the fall, and usually that's the problem with a lot of beginners is that they'll come in and they'll fight, they'll resist. And then if you you pit them against another beginner, and then one beginner will entangle his legs onto the other, and he'll try to force it. He'll try to force the, you know, the throw, the takedown. And the other one who doesn't have enough experience to understand that you essentially in that position, your checkmate, you should just accept the fall. They resist, and then their foot gets stuck on the ground while their body gets twist, and there you go, the knees go. And then over time, let's say you get thrown, and on top of that, you make the mistake of sticking your arm out, or even like this, or even just trying to post it with your forearm, your elbow.
Yeah.
Your shoulders are gonna go, and people are constantly attacking on either, for the most part, most people are right-handed. They attack on the right side, so they're gonna attack on your right arm, and your right arm gets pulled like constantly while you're practicing. And if you're right-handed, your right hand is forward, and so is your right leg. So it creates a big imbalance in your body too. Like, so all the musculature of your body is like pulled to the right. That's what happened to me. So now I got lower back issues, and I got deviation of the spine towards the right. This shoulder here is messed up, and I got ankle. I got my right ankle it lost its mobility, because one thing if you don't learning how to break falling is a little bit complicated in the sense that there's a lot of little details that if you're not taught correctly, you could get injured. So me, for example, when I was falling, I was being thrown, and you get thrown a lot in judo. You know, that's part of the learning process. It's like in jiu-jitsu, you tap out a lot, right? And in judo, you get thrown a lot. So I was getting thrown a lot, and the thing is, when you land, you have to keep. This is a thing. You have to keep your foot flexed. You know, I'm not flexible enough to pull up my foot and show you, but you gotta. If this was my foot, you would have to keep it flexed.
Hold on, I think I am. Okay, here's a foot. There's a flexed foot. There's a pointed foot. There's a relaxed foot. Flexed, pointed, relaxed. Okay.
There you go. There you go. So you got to keep it flexed, because a lot of times what's going to happen is that your heel is going to smash into the ground. You know, when you land. So if you don't do that and you land enough on that on your heel, okay, and your foot is not flexed, it's going to like give such a shock to your ankle that it's going to displace it, and it's going to cause like injury to your ankle. And then you might just think it's a sprained ankle, but you do that enough times over a span of like, 4 years, let's say 5 years, then all of a sudden that ankle that keeps on getting a beating, well, loses its mobility. So that's what happened to my ankle. And yeah. So
this
judo
is the best endorsement for judo I've ever heard, man.
The best what?
The best endorsement for judo I've ever heard, man.
Oh yeah, it's a man's sport, man. You know, it's a ride. Like you get, like, that's why I don't suggest it to everybody. Like, I talk about it in my videos, but I'm like, man, judo, you're gonna get busted up. So here are the ways that I found to survive. And if I had to do it again, this is what I would suggest you to do. And what else is bad in judo? Oh, your knees. Yeah, your knees. They get entangled all the time, especially with beginners. Actually, I say that, but it's a funny thing. It was actually a black belt that busted my knee like the first month I started judo. He busted up my knee because he felt threatened in randori. And I think this black belt wasn't somebody who's like a high level competitor or anything like that. He did earn his black belt, but he's not like the best fighter, so to speak. And he felt threatened by me because he saw that I was I was doing okay for myself. And
Yeah.
yeah, so our legs got entangled and he busted up my knee. And actually, there was a second time it happened on the other knee, and it was another black belt. This guy was actually a good fighter. He was on the national team, and he busted up my knee because he's just crazy, you know?
Not all judo players are created equal, man.
Well,
This is something I've learned over the years. I've trained with a lot of judoka. Like in China, a huge percentage of the people who go into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu come from a judo background because judo is a fairly popular sport in China, whereas Jiu-Jitsu is a fairly new one. But there are a lot of people leaking over from judo into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and man, there is such a broad spectrum of skill levels. So when somebody says I'm a black belt in judo, I don't know what that means, to be honest, because I've met black belts who are just absolute killers in almost all aspects of grappling, and then I've met black belts who are, you know, pretty good at throwing on the floor and nothing else. And you guys who are black belts who are pushovers and guys who are black belts who are world beaters. Like in your experience, have you seen this sort of diversity of skill level in judo amongst black belts?
oh yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. You know, like because there's I mean, there's some black belts that are more what do you call it? They're for it's more recreational.
Yeah,
You know, like they enjoy the art, they do the katas, you know. They didn't really like to compete, so they got their black belt, you know, because the way you get your black belt here, right, in Canada, is that once you get your brown belt, then after that you have to go past, you have to accumulate 120 points in competition,
right.
and you have to pass the exam in front of like a whole bunch of in front of the federation, you know, some judges,
Okay.
where they call out some techniques and you have to perform a kata, and
Right. So
so
it's
that's how
not
you get
something
your black belt.
that your instructor can give to you in the gym.
Exactly, exactly. And now the thing is, for the 120 points, you could either accumulate it through competition, which is the fastest way, or okay, like you could if you don't want to compete, well then it's gonna take you, it could take you 3 to 5 years
Mm.
to get that black belt, because you need those points. If you don't have those points, you're not getting your black belt. If you're a competitor, then you're gonna get it relatively fast. You know, you just do you do a couple of you do one season of competition, and you could accumulate enough points, and then from there you do
So
your
you can
exam, you
get
get your
points
black belt.
without competition. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, yeah. Every year that you pay your fees to the Judo Federation, when you get your brown belt, you get 10 points.
Okay. So basically, if you just keep showing up, eventually you'll get that belt, right?
Yeah, and if you want a ref, like if you want a ref, you can get maybe 10 points too for each
Okay.
competition that you ref, I think. And then if you do seminars, I think um, you can get 10 points too per seminar. So
Hmm.
you would have to do quite a bit of seminars, quite a bit of refing, and then on top of that, every year you pay your registration fees for judo, so you would get your 10 points. So it would take, you could get your black belt. It would just take you a lot longer. That's all.
Yeah. Now, combining the two previous topics, we were talking about older guys training, and we're talking about judo now. Now, judo has a really interesting history of older guys training. For example, one of the most famous examples, Mifune, you know, one of the students of Jigoro Kano. You can see videos of him on YouTube at age 70 and age 80, doing randori with his students, and it's an interesting video because I can see, like, you know, some of them obviously they're respecting the fact that he's an older gentleman. They're respecting the fact that he's, you know, he's the honorable sensei or whatever it is. But some of these guys, I can see they're also legitimately trying to toss this dude on the ground. And have you seen these videos of Mifune doing randori?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have.
And they're so interesting because of the way he moves. It's very very different from the way that most people approach judo. Because you know when I would describe it as like a floating quality. He tries, you know, they grab the lapels, he grabs under the triceps on the gi and just sort of floats with them. and it's very graceful, and it's very interesting. It is an economy of motion that is sorely lacking in most people. Have I don't know how I want to formulate this question, but have you seen anything like that in real life?
I've seen one guy at my first judo club. This guy looks like, I hope he's not going to watch this. I don't think so, because he doesn't have internet or Facebook or cell phones for that matter, because he's kind of weird
Yeah.
that way. But he's a teacher, and he has his black belt. This guy looks like nothing. You look at him like puny, you know? And then when he fights, okay, and when he fights though, so we go Hajime, and then, I'm like coming at him like this with my hands up, and he just stands there with his arms to the side.
Yeah.
As soon as I grab him, he just waits for me to, then he can, I grab him, then after that, he'll grab me back, but then it's all about timing. His judo is all about timing, but he's so good at it. He's at such a level that, yeah, he takes me down like this, and he's hardly using any strength, hardly using any strength at all. It was really impressive. He was in his mid-30s, I believe.
Okay.
And I'm physically bigger and stronger than him. And yeah, he beat me like nothing, like nothing. It was, and I asked my judo coach, my competition judo coach at that time. This was at the first club. I asked him, hey, what's with this guy? I can't, like he has this funny way of doing things, and he just beats my ass all the time. And he's like, oh, he's a timing guy. He's a timing judo. His judo is all about timing, all about like precision, technique, timing. That's what it's about. And he's developed it at a very, like, he's an amazing judoka. So I'm like, okay, so how do you beat him? Oh, he's like, oh, easy. I overpower him. I'm like, well, what do you mean by overpowering? Well, he's like, listen, it's not complicated. Like my judo is very competition oriented. And the way you beat a guy like that is that you grab, obviously, like in judo, it's all about the grips, right? So you grab the sleeve, you put that down, you bring that big overhand right over his on top of his back.
Grab the scruff of the gi.
Crush. Exactly. Like instead of grabbing the lapel, you grab over and you crush him. And my coach, my competition coach, had such power in this position here. He could hold you like this for like 5 minutes while you're wiggling around like, for dear life trying, but you won't get out of it. That's how strong he is, He could probably like, have a drink, smoke a cigarette, and then come back here and you wouldn't be able to move. And then he would let it loose when he'd want to attack you. And that's how he defeated this ultra technical, ultra precise, with amazing timing judoka. But he crushed him with strength. Strength matters in judo. Strength and size, it matters. So what I'm getting at is that the whole Mufume video thing, I think that I believe he has amazing timing and he has amazing skills, right? His timing's good. His skill set is good. Like he has that tactical awareness. He sees things coming. But I mean, he was what was he, like 80 years old in that video, or 90? Okay, but
I think there were two. One he was like 70, the other 80.
Yeah. But I still think that. So I think that he probably is very high level. But at the same time, I think his students were giving him too much respect, and they weren't crushing him. They were giving him what he wanted, even though it was with force. But he's been doing this for so long that he could see it coming. He was like, his students were giving him the kumikatas. They were going 50-50 grip. So when you give a guy 50-50 grip, even though you have 50-50, and then you go for your technique, even if you go for it with speed and strength, I mean, it's somewhat telegraphed, so to speak. And
that's a good point, because there was no grip fighting. There was just like, okay, let's, almost like an agreement. We're going to grab in this specific way. All right, ready, go.
Exactly.
I want this lapel. No, you don't. Get that on. No stripping the grips, none of that.
Exactly. So in my opinion, like, because the rule of thumb in judo is if you have 50-50 grips, like you have your grips on me, I have my grips on you, then it's the man with the better judo that wins. But
Yeah.
even if let's say, for example, your judo was better than mine's, but I get the dominant grip, right? Like a 2-on-1, so to speak, or, then yeah, my chances of throwing you go way, 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 well, way up. So that's why I think that even though he probably is very, very skilled, very high level, I think it was more of a demonstration thing than anything else. Like his students were, yes, they were coming in to attack him with full force and speed, but I mean, it's telegraphed because they both had 50-50 grips, and there's probably a certain level of respect there. They're not gonna, and there was no grip fighting, so that doesn't make sense. If you watch any video, judo video, like in the Olympics, you'll notice they fight like hell for their grips.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's like it's the first thing, man. Like, whoever wins that battle essentially is gonna throw the other person. So
It's strength in martial arts, strength in combat sports. It should be obvious, and this is something I talk about on my channel constantly, is how important strength training is for combat sports athletes. But it's still to this day a very highly resisted topic. Like Keenan Cornelius, he, former and multiple time world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, famously said, I might get this quote wrong, but I love it. It's something along the lines of, the most important thing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is lifting weights. The second most important thing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is knowing Jiu-Jitsu. And when people hear that, they hate it. They're like, no, but my professor told me it's about leverage and pressure and yeah, okay, sure. But when all other things are equal, right? Say you get on the mat in a competition and you're a black belt and you're competing with another black belt. Which black belt wins? Presumably they both know the same moves, the same techniques, the same strategies. Which one wins? The more athletic and the more aggressive one is the one that's going to win that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I also talk about Bruce Lee on my channel a lot, and a lot of people hate me for it because I like to dispel a lot of the stupid myths around the guy. I love Bruce Lee, and I hate the myths built up around him. One thing Bruce Lee does not get enough credit for by the Bruce Lee fanboys is the emphasis he put on strength training, especially in an era where people were telling combat sports athletes, don't pick up a weight. Like even the great Jack Dempsey, a man that I idolize as much as anyone, in his book Championship Fighting, which I love, and almost everything in that book is gospel truth about boxing. But one thing he tells you, don't lift weights. It'll make you slow and muscle bound. And when I read that, I was like, well, he's a product of his time in that regard. But that was commonly believed, and it still is commonly believed among many people. I read this in the comments of my YouTube videos constantly. Don't lift weights, it'll slow you down. Don't lift weights, it will make you too bulky. And I keep telling people, no, strength is the precedent for athletic performance. Strength is the precedent for all athletic performance. If you want functional flexibility that you can actually use, you also need to be strong. If you want to be fast, you also need to be strong. If you want these athletic attributes that make you a good fighter, you need to be strong first.
Oh yeah, 100%. Because going back to what you were saying, Keenan Cornelius, where he said the first thing is lifting weights, the second thing is knowing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Well, strength and size and all that, it matters, right? And I think so. Just to stay on that point that Keenan Cornelius said, because I always say the same thing more or less, and that's okay. You need to have skills, but you need to have the strength and conditioning to back up that skill, because that skill alone, if you meet a person who's of equal skill to you, it's going to be the stronger and faster one, and that's going to win. You know, and of course, there's the whole mindset behind it too. But the stronger guy is going to win. If both skill sets are pretty much equal. And yeah, it's super important. And I think where people get it wrong when they say that, oh, lifting is going to get you slow, is because they're looking at bodybuilders.
Yeah.
Okay, first off, a bodybuilder takes steroids. So he's above his genetic limits in terms of how much muscle he could pack on. Like, because there's a limit to how much each person can pack on in a lifetime. It ranges from 20 to 40 pounds of lean muscle mass in a lifetime. That might not sound like a lot, but most people, when they gain muscle, you don't just gain muscle. You gain muscle. There's a little bit of fat in there. There's glycogen. There's water. You know, so I mean, you know, that's why when you hear people say stuff like, oh, like a before and after picture, this guy gained, you know, like 10 pounds of muscle in 3 months. No, he didn't. He might have gained 1 or 2, and the rest is just fat, water, and glycogen. And if you took steroids, he might have gained 3, you know, but the rest is still fat, water, and glycogen, you know, because when you're bulking up, like it's a physiological process of breaking down your muscle tissue and rebuilding it with protein. That shit takes time. It doesn't happen like that. So with that said, if you're a bodybuilder, well, first of all, you're taking steroids, so you're above your genetic limit. So now, of course, it's going to hinder you. And bodybuilders aren't playing any sports. That is their sport. Their sport is just to pack on muscle. But if you're a natural athlete and you take and you lift weights, you want as much possible as your genetics will allow, because that's only going to make you stronger, faster, and more explosive and less injury prone, and it's going to translate into performance. But how much muscle can you actually put on? Well, it's genetics. Some people could put on that 40 pounds, so to speak, of lean muscle mass in their lifetime, and some people only 20. So whatever it is that genetics that you have, you want to max it out. Yeah. But it takes about 10 years to max it out. 10 years of consistent training and doing the right thing to really max it out. Most people never get close to maxing out their potential, you know? And that's my take on it.
Yeah, it's funny we say like only 20 pounds of muscle, and yet if you put like 20 pounds of meat on the table and looked at it, you'd be like, that's a lot of meat, man. That is a lot. So, yeah, man. I was looking at a picture of Thor Bjornsson posted on social media the other day. He went to some barbecue restaurant and they gave him like a 5-pound stack of meat, and it was like this ungodly giant stack of pieces of cow and pig that were just I was like, that would not fit in a human stomach. Anyway, not a normal human. Maybe Thor could eat it, but that was a lot of food. Just 5 pounds of barbecue meat, man.
Yeah, but he's a big man, right? So
yeah.
And, like, I don't know, man. You ever watch those naughty or not videos on YouTube?
I've seen some of those. I mean, there are a bunch of different channels dedicated to is this guy natural or not? And I forget the dude's name, but this one guy, he's basically convinced that nobody is natural, and he's looking at guys who have a physique like me, and he's like, "There's no way this guy can have a natural physique. You can see his abs." I'm like, it's not that hard to have visible muscle striations. Like that is an achievable thing for a human being to do, even in their 40s. It's anyway.
But how old are you exactly, Ramsey? Like you're 40.
42.
42. Okay, we're exactly the same age.
Yeah.
I was my friend told me about that. My friend who watches your channel too, and is a big fan. By the way, I have a question for you from him, which I told him I was going to ask. But before I get to that, I just wanted to say that when he told me you were my age, I was like, wait a second, he looks really good. You do. You know why? Because the thing is, you're also Caucasian. And a lot of Caucasians, they seem to have crappy anti-aging genes. For some reason, they wrinkle up fast, and they just they shrivel up. Like maybe it's just too much exposure to the sun. I don't know, but
I think a lot of his lifestyle. You know, my
Yeah,
wife has gotten
yeah.
really into skincare recently. And one thing she started doing she never did before is wearing sunscreen every day. And this is something Chinese women do all the time. And my wife used to make fun of them, like, "Oh, why are they wearing sunscreen all the time? This is silly." But then she noticed something is, Chinese women tend to look very youthful, even when they're old, even when they're like 80 and 90 years old. And she started thinking, maybe there's something to that. And so she starts researching skincare, and apparently, yeah, there is the sun ages the skin. But yeah, I think what it comes down to is a lot of people just have crappy lifestyles. Like, clean living goes a long way. Staying hydrated. I don't drink alcohol. I don't do drugs.
Mm, mm.
I don't even use caffeine. That shocks a lot of people. Like, what? You don't even have coffee or tea or anything like that? No, none of that. And simple lifestyle choices. I eat whole foods. I don't eat garbage. I don't eat processed crap. And I try to stick to a consistent sleeping schedule. And and above all else, I here's the secret, man. I get out there and I train. I get out there and train. And that's the magic pill. That is the magic pill, man.
Okay,
That
okay,
is
I
as
see.
close to the fountain of youth as you're going to get.
So you train a lot, and at the same time, you do a lot of things right. Like you don't smoke, you don't drink, and you eat pretty clean. And yeah, it shows. It shows. And I'm surprised because usually, like I rarely meet a Caucasian 42-year-old, even if they work out and they're in shape,
Yeah.
that look as good as you do. Like facially, I'm looking at you, and I'm like, you're not that much different from me, in terms of youthfulness,
Mm.
facial. Yeah, so I'm pretty. I was like, man, he looks good, you know. Like for a white guy who's my age, like he looks like you're like you'd be the equivalent of me, but white, which is
Well, thanks, man.
yeah, yeah. Hey, by the way, you kind of I found out in one of your videos that Bruce Lee had a stuntman, and I was like,
Yes.
no
Yes,
way.
Yuan Hua. Yuan Hua, he's a famous Hong Kong movie stuntman. He performed in a bunch of movies. And in the movie Enter the Dragon, anytime you see Bruce Lee do an acrobatic movement, there are a few movements like he does some round offs and then a flip over a pole at the beginning of the movie after that
Hmm.
first fight scene, and then there's that scene where he's fighting I think it's Bob Wall, and he does the backflip kick. That's
Yeah,
Yuan
yeah.
Hua. Every time there's an athletic or an acrobatic movement, an athletic movement. Anytime there's an acrobatic movement in a Bruce Lee movie, it's Yuan Hua. And a lot of
Oh
people hate to hear this because they want to, believe Bruce Lee could do everything, but he was a smart man. He was smart enough to know his limitations. I mean, Bruce Lee spent most of his adult life working with a serious back injury, and yeah, he understood he was not the larger than life superhero portrayed in the movies. And yes, he had that stunt double, Yuan Hua.
yeah, yeah. That kind of surprised me, and for it's been a long time now that I've been disillusioned. I mean, no, that's not the right word. I'm trying to say that for a long time when I was young, like everybody else, I wanted to believe, well, I like to believe, I did believe that he was invincible.
Yeah,
And then the more I got into when I started training Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then doing some wrestling, doing some boxing, doing some Thai boxing and all that, that's when I realized that and like no, I think he was just a man. He was very intelligent, and he did a lot of things, and he brought kung fu to what do you call it?
yeah.
To the public, so to speak. He popularized kung fu and made it open up a lot of doors to all the things that are going on today, so to speak. But he was just human,
Yeah. He was a guy who
and
pointed his finger in the right direction. And to paraphrase a Bruce Lee quote, if you focus on the finger instead of what you're pointing at, oh man, you miss the whole point. But that's what a lot of Bruce Lee fans do. They focus on his finger instead of what he actually pointed at. Like, hey guys, go lift some weights and train and learn a bunch of different martial arts and take the best of everything and skip out on the jump training, and everyone's like, "Ooh, look at that finger! Oh, that finger's so amazing! Ooh." I think
Exactly,
Bruce Lee would
exactly.
be. I think Bruce Lee would be shocked and appalled by the way people hold him up on a pedestal today.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think so. And it's so true what you're saying there. Like that scene in Enter the Dragon where he's teaching that young kid and he's pointing at the moon and all that and he's saying all that. Like that's exactly what tends to happen with people who worship Bruce Lee to that extent, to that level, you know? And yeah, he was just a man. And I mean,
Oh man,
funny thing.
you just got excommunicated from the Church of Jeet Kune Do, my friend.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's okay with that. I mean, they could come challenge me when things open up again. I could tell them where my club is, and they could come, and we'll duke it out. We'll film it, have some fun. I don't mind, you know. And yeah, but you know, the one thing, like, okay, you know how those Wing Chun people say that, oh, Wing Chun, Bruce Lee, Wing Chun, and all that. But then you made me realize in one of your videos is that, well, actually, what happens is that he he performed very poorly against Wong Jackman.
Yeah,
And that's why he essentially was like, oh, holy crap, wait, this stuff doesn't work.
yeah.
Now I gotta go.
Not just that, he
I
realized
gotta
he was
find.
in terrible shape. Like that's one of the moments in his life that inspired him to get physically fit, because I mean, he got gassed very quickly, and he was like, man, that fight was what, like a minute, a couple minutes tops, and I feel like crap. I don't like this. And after that moment, he started, really pushing himself. And I got a lot of comments on that video saying that wouldn't happen. Nobody who wins a fight thinks like that. And those people haven't been in real fights. I just coached a bunch of my students for their first amateur fights. There was a fight show here in Shanghai on Saturday, and one of my students, Ali, you've seen him in a few of my videos. He's a dude from Bosnia, tough, athletic guy, and he has his first amateur boxing match. He comes from a karate background, but his first amateur boxing match, and he won, 3-round decision. You know, decent performance. But afterward, he comes up to me and he says, "I'm so sorry, coach. I'm so sorry I disappointed you." And he was so unhappy with his performance because he got tired, he gassed out. He didn't stick to the game plan. He didn't box the way in this fight that he did in the gym. And he was like, "Man, I've got such a long way to go." And I was like, "Good. It's good you recognize that. It's good you recognize that, because most people, when they win, they pat themselves on the back and everyone's like, 'Good job, you won,' and they feel good about that. And maybe they'll think, I can improve this, I can improve this detail here." But I was actually really happy to see how disappointed he was in his performance, because I was like, that is the emotional content that elicits change, positive change. Like, this guy is going to make some changes, and next time he's going to get better. And I can tell next time he's going to win his next fight, and he's going to come out of that fight disappointed. He's going to be like, man, I mucked that one up too. And then he's going to fight a tougher guy, and he's going to beat that dude. He's going to do a little better, but he's going to be that much more disappointed. And it sounds like a terrible process, but it's a beautiful thing to be able
Yeah,
to critique yourself to that level.
I
And
think
a
that's
lot of,
it, right?
yeah,
Oh,
exactly. And
sorry.
the Bruce Lee fans, they hate hearing me talk like that about Bruce Lee, that he was disappointed in himself, even though, he wrote about that. His wife went into detail about how disappointed he was in his own performance, but it's the truth. That is what a good martial artist does.
Well, I think that not now that we're talking about it, it just made me think of something. I think that himself, he was probably this. He was under the illusion that he could fight
Mm.
because he got into some street fights in Hong Kong, beat up a couple of guys here and there, which
When he was a
he
kid,
absolutely.
nonetheless.
Hmm?
When he was a kid, he was a teenager when he had those fights.
Yeah, like kids
Totally different
fighting
thing,
other
fighting other
kids.
kids versus fighting a grown man.
Exactly. Kids fighting other kids where both kids don't really know how to fight. They just know a little couple of, passes here and there that they might have picked up. But I mean, that means absolutely nothing, right? and then he went and trained, and then he was all into his thing, thinking that what he knows is really efficient and really works, and he was cocky about it. And I think now that we're talking about it, I think he essentially realized after like the fight with Wong Jack Man that he realized he couldn't really fight. I think he realized that in a big way, and that's why he started looking for the truth now, right? So he wanted to learn how to fight, and then that's when he started like studying boxing, grappling, and all kinds of stuff. And eventually, you know, he broke his back, and he had time to sit down and think about Jeet Kune Do and all that. And so I think that's it. That's it. Like he when he practically got, oh, he won, but I mean, he could have easily lost. Yeah. That's what I think will happen. And he realized, shit, I don't know how to fight. And I'm going about, I have all these schools that I'm teaching, you know, and I'm teaching not pure nonsense because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I got to figure this out because this can't, like, this is not like, you know, it's his pride probably took a big hit there. And that's when he's like, yeah, I got to really study this and figure it out. And I think he did to a certain extent. And, but I mean, yeah, anybody who's never been in, who's never competed in a combat, you know, sport or fought, you know, in a ring or anything like that. I mean, yeah, of course, like you could, you don't really know what it's like. You could win and still realize that you suck.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the other guy made one more mistake than you did.
You got lucky, you know?
Yeah.
That's all it is. Like, cause you know, I compete in judo, and there are times when I'm like, I can't believe I won that. And I won by like 1 point just because the guy made a mistake, and I was able to capitalize on a little technicality. You know, I held them down a little bit longer, and then we ran out of time and I won, but I still know that that was a crappy victory. It wasn't nothing to be proud of.
That was my experience with my first pro MMA fight. I won my first pro MMA fight, not because I knew anything about mixed martial arts, because I didn't. I went straight from professional kickboxing to MMA because I got challenged by this dude on the internet back in the day. And he challenged me to an MMA fight. This guy had a few fights under his belt. He had like 1 win, 2 losses, something like that. And he challenged me. He said, "You're just a kickboxer." I was like, "Well, I'm pragmatic. Let's fight. Let's see what happens." And I won not because I was any good at MMA, not because I knew how to grapple, none of that. It's just he sucked a little bit more than I did, and he made one more mistake than I did. And after I got out of the fight, I had a broken foot, and I couldn't even walk. And I was like, "Did I really win, though?" Like at one point, this guy lifted me up over his head and slammed me on the ground, and I was like, "Crap! I don't even know how to defend a takedown." And he gets on top, and I try to you know, grapple, and I'm like, "Crap! I don't know how to grapple." And at one point, I got my legs around him in a position similar to a triangle choke, and I was like, "Crap! I don't even know what a triangle choke is or how to finish this." And of course, he gets out right away, and I scramble back up to my feet, and eventually I land a few liver shots that drop him to his knees, and eventually he starts tapping because I keep hitting him in the side. I'm like, "Dang, I got lucky. I got so lucky in that fight." But everybody's like, "Yeah, you're so awesome." And the temptation to give into the adulation of the crowd is tremendous. The temptation to think, "Oh man, I'm so good because I have my hand raised at the end," is tremendous. But if you're honest, if you're an honest martial artist and you go through an experience like that, win or lose, you will realize, I have a lot of homework to do. I need to learn how to fight. I need to learn this new sport, whatever the situation is. And I think that's exactly what Bruce Lee went through as well.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, it takes nothing away about my respect for the man. Like he's still my childhood hero. He's done a lot for, you know, martial arts, bringing kung fu to, you know, the public and all that. And I still like to believe that he's invincible, but I know that that he's not, you know, that he's just a man. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's not even being disrespectful. You know, like what he did was amazing for, you know, for martial arts and everything. And he was very talented, in my opinion. He was very fast. He was very strong. You know, it's just that he didn't have time to continue his evolution. Because
Yeah,
imagine he died at the age of 32. Imagine if he would have had time to continue and to see MMA come about. I think he would have gotten involved, maybe not necessarily himself, but he would have trained some people to go in the cage and find out the truth of all of this. I think he would have been
maybe.
down with that 100%. Maybe not himself. Maybe he would have been too old, but he would have been involved. You know how we trained supposedly, like you're gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong here, because my martial art history is fuzzy.
Sure.
But he trained Joe Louis, right?
Yeah, I believe they trained together. Joe Louis spoke very highly of Bruce Lee. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he trained. Okay, this is a little bit. Did he train Chuck Norris or not? I'm not sure about that.
Depends on who you ask. Chuck Norris gave an interview where he said he taught Bruce Lee how to kick. Like, according to Chuck Norris, they were friends and they trained together from time to time. But the Bruce Lee fanboys will say that Chuck Norris was a student of Bruce Lee. The Chuck Norris fanboys will say Bruce Lee was a student of Chuck Norris. In Chuck Norris's own words, he said when they trained together, Bruce Lee would at first, repeat the Wing Chun dogma: no kicks above the waist, just kick the legs. It compromises your balance. And Chuck Norris, in his words, basically said, Bruce, you're really athletic and flexible and all this. You should really incorporate these kicks into your movement as well, which I
Mm.
know irritates the Church of Jeet Kune Do, but that's what Chuck Norris said, man. According to Chuck Norris, he taught Bruce Lee all the high spinning kicks that we saw in his movies.
Well, you know what? I wouldn't have a hard time believing that at all. I mean, Chuck Norris was, he was a champion kickboxer, right? If I'm not mistaken. So I wouldn't be surprised because I think that, and I've read that before too, that Bruce Lee at one point he was against kicking, like, and then somebody opened up his mind to that, and I didn't realize it was Chuck, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened. And who else was and Gene LaBelle. Gene LaBelle is the one who taught Bruce how to grapple.
Uh-huh.
Like
Yeah.
they trained. I remember reading that they trained together for a year in judo and submission and stuff like that. And so he was starting towards the end. He was starting to pick up on the grappling a little bit. But once again, he died too early, and he couldn't continue his evolution.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Did you ever hear the story about how they met? Like Gene
Um, Gene LaBelle and Bruce Lee. I
Yeah,
imagine
yeah,
it probably had something to do with stunt work in Hollywood, but I don't know.
exactly. Stunt work in Hollywood, and then at one point, Gene LaBelle grabbed Bruce and picked him up in the air, started walking around with him. I forgot what was the exact reason, but they're like, on a movie set, Gene LaBelle was a stunt guy, and Bruce was probably, I don't know. They probably had an exchange, and then, anyways, Gene LaBelle supposedly, I think Joe Rogan talked about this on one of his podcasts, but
Yeah.
picked him up, grabbed him, picked them up like this and started walking around. And I think Bruce said something like, let me go, or I'll kill you. And then Gene LaBelle said, like, I can't because you're going to kill me. But I think that's when Bruce realized, like, holy crap, this guy is strong. Like,
Oh
he could
yeah.
snap me in half with
Gene
his
LaBelle in his
hands if he
prime,
wanted.
man. That dude was jacked. I mean, he
Yeah.
he did he did things like that as a professional wrestler. He wasn't just a judoka, but he was also a professional wrestler as well. And he did stunts like that in the ring where he would, lift people up and carry them. And man, Gene LaBelle, I don't think he gets enough credit. Like, people always talk about Bruce Lee as being the father of MMA because Dana White popularized that expression. But Gene LaBelle actually did MMA fights before MMA was a thing. Like when he fought what's his name? Savage, the boxer. Blanking on his first, Milo Savage, the boxer. And that had goofy rules. Like, Gene LaBelle insisted that Milo Savage wear a gi top,
Hmm.
and which I think is kind of silly. If you're gonna fight, just fight. Let the boxer box. Let the judo guy do judo. But so they had kind of a screwy rule set where Milo Savage had to wear a gi top, and Milo also wore like fingerless bag gloves, which was kind of strange. But ultimately, Jean Labelle threw him on the floor and choked him out. You know, what you would expect a master grappler to do against a guy who doesn't know how to grapple. But, you know, for those who watched it at the time, they were kind of shocked. Like, what? Impossible. Boxing is a more popular sport than judo. And therefore, it must be more effective. That's how we tend to think. It's more popular, so it must be more effective. The mere exposure effect is very powerful. But, you know, all the mystique about Bruce Lee is fascinating, but it reminds me of something else I was thinking about the other day. I've been getting a lot of comments about Frank Dukes on my channel recently. You know, Frank Dukes, the guy who came up with a story that turned into Bloodsport. And, you know, he has some truly outlandish claims. And there are some Frank Dukes fans that come after me because I've made a few videos where, you know, I kind of poke fun at him a little bit because, you know, you simply cannot have a 62-round single elimination tournament, for example, without like 73 trillion human beings. But in my heart of hearts, nobody wants the Kumite to be real more than me. I'm just gonna put that out there. If Frank Dukes were to come out and prove us all wrong and produce like proof that his Kumite actually happened, in my heart I would be like, yes. But in the meantime, I remain skeptical. So there's something about like those childhood heroes, you know, those larger than life illusions that we have as children about martial art. You know, we secretly hope is true, but what you brought up about Bruce Lee, the fact that he was just a man, I think that in many ways that's more inspiring. And I'll tell you why. Because that means it's real. That means what he did is achievable. That means, you know, if Bruce Lee is strong and fast, you can be strong and fast too because you're a man too, right? If Bruce Lee did great things in cinema, you know what? That's achievable too. If Bruce Lee did great things in terms of, you know, his philosophy, awesome, because that means you can do that too, right? Anyone who is truly inspiring is someone who shows you the way, who shows you this is something that is possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, that's the problem when you put someone on a pedestal, right? It means that they're so special that means that you're not. And that means that what they did would be impossible for you to do, which is, okay, well, what's the point of that? But, and even Bruce Lee, he said it, right, in one of his interviews where he said he doesn't want to be seen as a star because that's an illusion. He wants to be seen as a great actor. And I think Bruce Lee himself, he would have wanted to inspire people in a way where make people believe that they could do what he does if they actually put in the work, you know, and so on and so on. He wouldn't have wanted people to see him as a god or anything like that. And and to get back to like the whole Kumite thing, like I love that movie, and you know, like if that was a real thing, yeah, you know, but of course it's not. But you know, one thing that really inspired me, and now I want to ask you more about this. You know that 80-year-old man that you said did Tai Chi and that essentially whooped your butt?
Yes.
Okay, is he still around today, or is he?
I don't know. I haven't seen him in over a decade, so I don't know if he's still alive. If anybody's watching this and they are in China, he lived in Jiangsu province in the city of Zhenjiang. And if you know where the vinegar factory is, there's a famous vinegar brand, Zhenjiang vinegar. It's known all over China. But he would train right next to the factory at a plaza right there. And he would train there every morning at 7 a.m. The man was named Wu Dao Shui. I don't know if that's a nickname or if that was his actual gift, because the translation is literally fish follows water. And I think it might be a nickname because that's kind of how he moved. Because he stood in a parallel stance. When I sparred with him, he stood in a parallel stance, and I thought, this is really weird. He had his hands down by his side. And at first, I just tried to grapple with him, you know, like, you know, he's old, he's much smaller than me, so I'll, you know, do that thing that, we were talking about with Mifune's students,
Mm-hmm.
paying respect to the older gentleman, basically. But as soon as I touched him, he grabbed my hand and he wrist locked me and throws me on the ground. And I get up, I'm like, ow, that really hurt. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get an underhook on this guy, and then he won't be able to do that. And so, he's just standing there in his parallel stance, and I start reaching for the underhook. And as soon as I make physical contact with me, he throws me like a hip toss. And I get up again. I'm like, because we're not training on mats, we're training like on a plaza with stone tiles. And I banged up my elbow pretty badly. And I get up, and he's like, come on, this time again with power. And so, I go at him, and I'm still just grappling, and he throws me on the floor several different ways and sweeps me and does like a snap down and trips me, and they're wrestling moves, like basic wrestling moves you'll see in freestyle wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, joint locks you'll see in jiu-jitsu and judo, and like movements. Nothing really surprised me, like, oh, here's some magic move I've never heard of before. Until he said, all right, for real, fight me, punch, kick, do that UFC stuff. I was like, all right, old man's not playing around. Let's see what he has. And so I start punching at him, and he's still standing in the parallel stance, and then he starts slipping and bobbing and weaving. I'm like, that's Tai Chi. What the heck? And he's bobbing and weaving and slipping as I'm trying to punch him, and then he comes up under and he grabs me again and puts me on the ground. And like everything he's doing is grappling. Like everything he's doing is grappling, like stuff you would see like high level judo, high level jiu-jitsu. And and it's shocking to me, one, because like in popular culture, Tai Chi is always presented as like this fancy looking, striking art. Like if you play any video game that has a Tai Chi character on their fighting roster, it's always like striking because that's how video games are. And in my mind, that's just how I pictured Tai Chi, and it blew my mind that it was grappling, first of all. And then I throw a front kick at the guy, and he catches the front kick and sweeps me, and it's the golf swing takedown. You'll see wrestlers like Kerry Kola teaches this on his channel. It's not a super well-known wrestling takedown, but it's become one of my favorites. It's a technique you'll see a lot of Sanda fighters. It's very popular in Sanda, Chinese kickboxing, basically, that allows throws and takedowns as well. And, since this old man did this to me, I'm like, dang, I got to learn that. I need to learn this move. It's become one of my favorite moves as well. Also, one of my favorite guard passes. Like, if somebody's on the ground already and you can get a hold of their ankle, you do the same movement. Essentially, you move them to the side and you can shoot right over into knee on belly position.
Mm.
And anyway, I learned a tremendous amount from this old guy. And so he beats me up and throws me on the ground a lot. And eventually I'm like, okay, I'm sick of getting thrown on the ground. This sucks. Training without mats is terrible. And again, when I tell this story, people are like, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Because I think, first of all, they're picturing that Tai Chi is magic. And Tai Chi Chuan is not magic. Like they're basically, there are a bunch of different styles of Tai Chi, but it basically comes down to two schools. Tai Chi Chuan, which is the unarmed form. Chuan is fist in Chinese, but fist doesn't mean punching. It just means that it's a hand-to-hand combat system. And then there's Tai Chi Jin, the sword style, which is sword fighting. And it's kind of interesting that they pair sword fighting and grappling together, because if you look at other historical sword fighting styles like Kenjutsu, Japanese sword fighting, that is coupled with Jiu-Jitsu, Japanese grappling, if you will. And why does grappling and sword fighting go together? And it's the same thing with Western sword fighting as well. For example, there was I believe it was an Italian swordsman wrote this a book. It's not a long one, but it's an old treatise on the rapier. That long, kind of thin but sharp sword that gentlemen would duel with back in the day. And he wrote this kind of confusing thing, which is in single rapier combat, the better wrestler almost always kills his opponent. If neither man knows how to wrestle, the stronger man almost always kills his opponent. And when I first read that, I thought, well, but they have swords, they have sharp swords. Why would wrestling or strength matter? And then I realized, just studying more about historical martial arts and kenjutsu and so on, when the swords cross into a bind, which they do all the time, as soon as you cross blades, that happens almost instantly in a sword fight. And when you're playing with a long sword, basically, it becomes a grappling situation very quickly. And the longer the sword, the deeper that bind can become, and the more important grappling becomes. Which is why the samurai used jujitsu, which later became judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and so on. And that is why when you read these old German sword fighting codices, there's so much emphasis on wrestling technique. And where was I going with this? Oh yes, Tai Chi. So Tai Chi is divided up into essentially these two schools: the grappling aspect, Tai Chi Twin, and the sword aspect, Tai Chi Jin. So, but today in modern culture, it's been relegated to basically, exercises for old people that they do in the park and nothing else. Right? Very few people use Tai Chi in actual combat anymore, and most people don't even remember what it's for. It would be like if people forgot what wrestling was for. Okay? If nobody remembered what wrestling was for, except maybe 4 or 5 old guys who still remember, but everybody else still practiced shadow wrestling. And if every morning, the old people would go out and put on their wrestling singlets and do some shadow wrestling, and shadow wrestling looks goofy, right? Do you ever do shadow judo by yourself?
Well, shadow judo, yeah, you could do that. You could practice your moves. But I mean, I
Yeah.
also wrestle now. I've been wrestling now for maybe a total of a year, but it's something that I do regularly. So my usual schedule is judo 3 times a week and wrestling 2 times a week, freestyle wrestling. So
Yeah.
I actually understand wrestling double legs, single legs, and I'm getting more and more knowledgeable as time goes on, because I used to just focus on judo, but then when I realized that if I wrestling actually would benefit my judo. So even when what you're saying here about shadow wrestling, I
Yeah.
could do that. I perfectly understand what you mean. I could do
Indeed.
arm drag, single leg,
Yeah,
come
but what
back
does that
up.
look like when you do it by yourself? It looks like,
It looks
without
like Tai
context, it looks
Chi. It
goofy.
looks like like these
Yeah, you go for an
circular
arm drag and
movements.
it's like, and this is a Tai Chi movement. This, doing this thing, and you do it by yourself, and it looks like you're trying to be a wizard casting a spell, but no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So it makes sense to me. But you're right about that. I think that's the thing. Like, now that you explain it in terms of the two styles where you have Tai Chi grappling and Tai Chi sword, Tai Chi hand to hand and Tai Chi sword, and how essentially when there's a sword fight, you're gonna clash and you're gonna end up really close. And when you're close, well, you're not gonna disengage respectfully and then start again. No, you're gonna capitalize on wherever you can in that position. So that's where the grappling aspect of it comes in. So now it makes a lot of sense. And I think that a lot of people, you're right about that. I think a lot of people don't even know. Even people who teach Tai Chi or who are supposedly masters might have forgotten this, and
Yeah.
they don't they just don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to explain it properly. They don't know how to teach it because they don't have the whole thing, the whole package. So, for a Tai Chi master to tell you that Tai Chi is for hand to hand combat, and he might not actually know what he's talking about, and it's not going to translate very well when you actually get into a fight. But if you actually understood the whole system and somebody taught it to you properly in the context of sword fighting, and then you have to grapple, you could actually make it work. Because what I believe this 80-year-old man, I don't believe it's magic what he did. I think he just has a very high level of skill, kind of like Mifune, right?
Yeah.
And he has so much awareness in terms of tactical awareness. And he's so aware of how his body moves, how your body moves, and how to off balance you. you know, and so on. That's why he's able to do what he did. And I 100% believe that's possible, but it's very rare that you meet a 80-year-old man who's able to do that, first of all. And then when you said that he could do a backflip, in my mind, this
Yes,
guy was in shape. He
I
was
know
a
that shocked me more than the fact that he was able to, out grapple me.
Mhm.
Because I've met strong older gentlemen. Like I grew up in a small farming town, and I got to at advanced stages where we're doing serious physical labor and just really strong guys. But when this guy was doing backflips, I was like, okay, this isn't real. This is like CGI or something. What is? But oh man, but he was, man, he was. That is the craziest detail of that whole story to me, the fact that he was able to do backflips. And there I was at the time, like, I was like 30 years old when I met him, 42 now, but I was like, I can't do a backflip. And I'm like a fraction of his age. There's something seriously wrong here. But it was
Yeah.
inspiring. It was really inspiring. At that point, I was like, all right, my lifelong goal, be able to do a backflip before the age of 80. Still working on it.
But you know what? It's a funny thing you say that, but actually that's one of my things too. I want to be able to do a backflip and a front flip, and then in terms of acrobatics, right? Because
Yeah.
that would mean like I have a certain level of control over my body, which is something I want to be able to achieve. And hearing you say that, I know it's not BS because it's you. Like you're not the type of guy to like lie about that kind of stuff. Um, so it's very inspiring actually to hear that an 80-year-old man could move like that, and not only move like that, but could even fight.
Yeah.
So essentially, I want to be that guy in about 40 years.
Yeah, man. What was so amazing about this experience to me, it was like at this point I was feeling like giving up on martial arts in a big way. I was like, man, I'm not really accomplishing what I want to accomplish. And then I meet this guy, and this was one of the most inspiring instances of my life, especially when I asked him afterward, how long did it take you to master Tai Chi? And he starts laughing. Very jovial guy, a funny dude. And he says, oh, about 80 years. Took me 80 years to master Tai Chi. And I'm like, wait, you're 80 years old? And he's like, exactly. Exactly. It takes a lifetime, is what he's saying. Essentially, just don't give up. Just keep doing it every day. I'm like, well, how often do you train? How many hours a day do you train? And he laughs even more. He's like, I train an hour a day between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. Then I go to work. Like this guy was still working. He wasn't retired. He was a chauffeur, like a professional chauffeur for the guy who owned the vinegar factory.
Mm,
And I was like, man, this is so strange because again, in America, by the age of 80, people are retired, living in a nursing home. They're not physical, but they're also not working either. But this guy, he didn't give up on life at all. And I think a lot of Americans give up on life early. For example, a lot of people stop doing sports when they finish high school. And then even more people give up on sports when they finish college. And after college, you don't have venues to compete in sports anymore. You can't just, I mean, sometimes you might have a pickup game of basketball with your friends, but other than that, there's no wrestling team to join. There's no lacrosse team. There's no football team. And so people just sort of give up and go to work and grow a gut and slowly wait to die. But what this old man taught me is you don't have to. You don't have to slowly wait to die. You can get out there and train every day, and training a little bit every day consistently is much more important than trying to cram a lot in at once.
yeah.
And yeah, this is a principle that was really reinforced to me when I learned how to use the speed bag. Like I went my whole pro fighting career without ever touching a speed bag. I thought it was nonsense. I thought it was silly junk training. And when I retired from fighting and started coaching full time, new students would come into my gym and they would see a speed bag on the wall and they would say, hey, how do you use that? And I would be like, this is embarrassing, but I don't actually know. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to learn the speed bag. And I'm so glad I did, because there are so many practical applications to the speed bag that I've gained for fighting. But I went to YouTube to look up some videos, and guys were like, okay, you hit the speed bag like this. No, you hit the speed bag like that. But the most important video, I don't even remember the dude's name, but he looks like Kurt Vonnegut, has like an afro, and it's a really old video. And he said, okay, I'm going to show you a basic speed bag pattern. Here's another one, but here's something even more important than the patterns. And that is, practice this thing for 10 minutes every single day, and do that consistently for 3 or 4 months. And that will equate to 10 hours of actual practice. Now, if you sit down right here, right now, and hammer out 10 hours in a row on the speed bag, you will not be any better at hour 10 than you will be at hour 1. But if you spread that 10 hours out over 3 or 4 months and train consistently for 10 minutes a day, then you will look like a professional after 3 or 4 months. You'll look better than Rocky does in the Rocky movies, which really isn't that hard. It just takes consistency. And so I took him at his word, and I realized that improvement does not come from repetition to repetition. It comes from sleep to sleep. There's so much wisdom in the method that he taught. Train consistently in manageable chunks each day, and do that every day for a long period of time, and that will give you the magic power that you so desire, if you will. That will yield the results.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy what could be done in when you're just consistent at something, you know? And it's a funny thing too, because what you just said right there is really interesting in regards to if you do 10 hours of speed bag, whereas instead if you separate it like 10 minutes a day for, you know, X amount of time, you'll actually get better results. And I think that because I think that you have to be mindful when you do something. So when you do something, you have to do it. You have to make sure that you're doing it properly, and then you have to like figure out what's the next step in your head so that you could, you know, continue to improve on that specific skill that you're trying to develop, like that, or that specific drill. You know,
Yeah.
to actually progress it through, because supposedly it's and I was listening to this this interview with John Danaher. You ever heard of him? The
Yes.
from Renzo Gracie, the Death Squad.
Yeah, John Danaher. I love it when he says the fundamental asymmetry of the human body is. He starts so many sentences that way.
Oh, he does? Okay, okay. But you know, I listened to him a couple of times before, and I found him like this guy's a genius. I really think he's uh, he knows what he's talking about, and he has a very deep
Yeah.
understanding of you know like of martial arts and grappling especially. And he was explaining how essentially if you drill, because he doesn't believe in drilling, he says that if you
Mm.
just drill and you put a number in your head, like okay, I'm gonna do 100 guard passes.
Mm.
Okay, that sounds like, but it's not actually gonna necessarily make you good at guard passing. What you have to do is that you have to have progressive overload. I'm
Mm.
sure I'm not using the right term here, but you got to progress that drill properly. So at the beginning, okay, you do a regular guard pass, but then after that, you might need your once you do about, let's say, 100 of them, well, the next 100 can't be the same type of drill anymore. Now it's going to be a guard pass, but maybe your opponent is going to give a little bit of resistance, or you're going to give a
Yeah.
little fake to the left and then go to the right, and you have to develop. So you got to progressively progressive overload your drill or your training, so to speak, so that you actually get better at it. Whereas if
Yes.
you're just doing the same thing mindlessly for
You're just
reps or
roughing
for
out a
time.
sequence. Yeah, that only gets you so far. That just teaches you the move.
Mhm.
Um, there's a Dennis Kelly. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt and also a judo black belt. I believe he lives in Australia. He's from Ireland originally, but he visited me in Shanghai, and he did a seminar about the omoplata at my gym, and it was just really basic information about the omoplata. And afterwards, I asked him, like, how would you how would you suggest practicing the omoplata? You've taught us the technique. How would you suggest practicing it? And he said, okay, let's do it like this. We're going to start the roll like about 2/3 of the way into the submission. So we've cleared the shoulder, right? We're almost at the end of the omoplata, right? All you have to do is, sit up and twist and grab, and then you have it, right? But the other guy's going to fight back. And so we drill. I use the word drill differently than most people. A lot of people say drill when I say sequence. So when I say drill, I mean there's an element of resistance. That means you fight back, but there's a very specific objective you're trying to accomplish. And a drill is going to be fairly short, like maybe 30 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, right? Whereas a sequence is like you go through the motions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sequencing the omoplata, you go through the movement with a completely cooperative partner, so you learn how the movement works, how to move your body, right? But the drill that Dennis Kelly put us through was this. We start with the omoplata almost completed. There's just one little thing to do, but the other guy fights back. So we have like 10-second reps of this. Like, see if you can finish in 10 seconds. And I realized right away, okay, we're learning something very valuable on both ends of the spectrum, how to defend, how to finish. Because a lot of jiu-jitsu classes are taught like this. They'll sequence a technique for like 30 minutes or so. They'll do a certain number of repetitions, like we're going to do omoplatas today, sequence it, go through the motions 30 times with your partner. Okay, good. Now let's roll. And then you roll and you start from whatever position, either they start standing or start from the ground, whatever. But maybe they'll get into a position to even attempt an omoplata once in the hour that they're rolling. And maybe not at all. And maybe in that one time they get in position to attempt the omoplata, the guy gets out before they even get to the end. And so they don't even know what it feels like trying to finish an omoplata against a resisting opponent. And then they go back to class, and in the next year, maybe they get into a position to attempt the omoplata 5 or 6 times, okay, against a resisting opponent in all those roles. And how much improvement do they get? How good do they get at omoplatas in that year? Not very much. Okay. But this method that Dennis Kelly showed us, like start when you're almost finished and resist, and do that in 10-second increments, do it a whole bunch of times, and then take it a step backwards. Okay, so you're like 2 steps away from finishing. And then we fight for it, and then take it back 1 more step. Now we're 3 steps away from finishing, and then take it back 4 steps. We're 4 steps away from finishing. So exactly what you're saying, that progressive overload, if you will, make it a little bit more difficult each time. But each step along the way, we get the experience of fighting through each phase that we wouldn't necessarily get the reps in live sparring. And this is something that I've taken to heart, and I do this constantly. And since I've started training this way, a lot of people come to me and they're like, dude, you're not like other gyms. I'm like, good, because I don't want to be. Because the average gym, what are they? They're average. What does the average gym do? They do what everybody else is doing, and they get the same results everybody else gets. And they exist in mediocrity. And what do I want to do? I want to train fighters who consistently win as many fights as possible. I want to give them the best possible opportunity they can to win when they compete. And in order to do that, you need to use the best possible training methods. And so, like John Danaher says, he says these things that shock people, like drilling is not as important as you think it is when we're saying drilling to mean sequencing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that shocks people because that's how most people train. And then you look at a guy like Firas Zahabi, who's always saying these very shocking things like, you don't need to do pad work. And people are like, what? No, people lose their minds. Like, of course I need to do pad work. And, people like me who tell people road work is not as necessary as most fighters think it is. And they're like, what? But boxers have been doing road work for forever. Okay. and people challenge these ideas, and it makes sense to challenge people who are challenging conventional wisdom. But you also have to ask yourself, are your training methods giving you the results that you want? And if not, why not? Critical thinking has one of the most important roles in martial arts, and yet we tend to simply defer to authority. We fall into the logical fallacy of an appeal to authority. I mean, how often do people advertise themselves as, you should come to my gym, you should come to my class because I'm an authority on this subject. You should watch my YouTube channel on martial arts because I'm an authority on this subject. I have this rank and this belt and this championship. Okay. And that's all great. And those are tags that get people's attention. And those are all positive signs that maybe you know what you're doing. But you also have to ask yourself, are my methods giving my students the results that they want? And if not, why not?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Which brings me to my friend's question. So this is for my buddy Anthony. So Anthony, I know you're gonna be listening to this. So his question, because he wants to get into MMA.
Yeah.
He wants to become a professional MMA fighter. And well, obviously he has to go through the process, which is, well, he has to train, which he started doing training at an MMA gym. He's down in Florida, and he's 25. And his question is, what's the best way to go about it to become a professional MMA fighter? In the sense that, like, what is it that you have to, what are the important things that you have to look out for? Like, is it the gym? Is it the coach? Is it what kind of environment that you have to be in? How many matches? I don't know, like how many amateur matches should you have before you go pro and so on? I know in some of your videos you said the first 10 matches you have suck. So is it better to
Yes.
stay to do the first 10 in amateur before you go pro, or and yeah, that's his question because that's what he wants to do.
Okay. Well, as far as the number of amateur matches you should have, amateur combat sports experience of any type is super valuable going into MMA, whether that is judo or jiu-jitsu or wrestling or boxing, or even if it's not an MMA, the fact that you are performing in this high stress situation, experiencing all the intangibles that you don't experience in the gym. For example, the performance anxiety, the crowds, the lights, the cheers, the boos. This has a profound effect on psychology. And one of the most crippling things for a fighter, especially a new fighter, is the performance anxiety. For example, I talked about my student Ali, who is a phenomenal athlete. He's a tremendous athlete. And he grossly underperformed in his fight on Saturday, even though he won. Right? But he grossly underperformed. Like, if you looked at him on the fight on Saturday versus the way he performs in the gym, it's like two different people. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde situation there. And this was shocking to him, but it wasn't shocking to me because that's normal in a first amateur fight. That is normal the first time you step in front of a crowd, to essentially forget who you are and create an imaginary monster in your mind called the fight. So instead of having two entities in the fight, you and your opponent, there's three. There's you, your opponent, and the fight itself. And yeah, man, we got to kill the fight before we can conquer our opponent. Right?
Okay, okay, yeah.
So that's what these first 10 amateur experiences do for us. They allow us to conquer the fight, that third entity in the cage, if you will. So, we're just fighting one person instead of two. I think this is why wrestlers do so well in mixed martial arts. It's not so much that wrestling is the greatest grappling system. It's awesome. It's great. Wrestling has a ton to offer for mixed martial artists, and I think everybody should wrestle. But what wrestling really brings to the table is the fact that, the average American high school wrestler, by the time they finish high school, how many wrestling matches have they done? live in front of a crowd, in front of people cheering and booing and making noise and all the intangibles you can't train for in the gym. A bunch. They have a bunch of amateur matches. Even people who weren't that competitive still have a bunch of matches. And so when they go into MMA for the first time, they're like, this part of the game isn't new. Being in front of people isn't new. The performance anxiety isn't new. The butterflies and the nerves and the anxiety is not new. And so they can focus on performing instead of, trying to kill that third entity, the fight in the cage, and they can just focus on their opponent. So that's one of the most important things, is just get exposure to experience performing in front of a crowd. This is something I see a lot in jiu-jitsu tournaments, like constantly. I go to jiu-jitsu tournaments mostly for fun, for personal development. I'm not super competitive about jiu-jitsu. I probably should be more competitive about it, but I'm not super competitive. To me, it's like, this is a fun drill. Like when I go to the gym, take striking out of the equation. So when I compete in jiu-jitsu, I have fun. And when I go to these tournaments, I see people who have not fought before. They've never been punched in the face before, and they are just strung out on adrenaline. They are hyped up with all these nerves. They are scared to death, and they're trying to calm themselves down. And I'm like, this is so interesting. Like, I'm not experiencing this at all. And some of these guys, I see, like, some of these guys are even better grapplers than me, and they're way, way more nervous. And I'm like, you don't need to be nervous. Well, you do, because you haven't conquered the fight yet, if you will. You haven't conquered the third entity yet. But when they do, yeah, they transform. They become different athletes. They become actual athletes, as opposed to a guy with imposter syndrome feeling like he doesn't belong on the mat or in the cage. It's a very common thing. So that's what I would say about the how many fights. It's variable. I've seen guys with 0 cage fights who were ready to compete professionally, most of whom had amateur wrestling experience. Wrestled in high school and wrestled in college. But for the average person, I would say about 10 amateur fight combat sports experiences. That would be a really smart thing to do before transitioning to professional fighting. But the other part of your question, like, could you reiterate that? Like,
Yeah,
what kind of gym coach things, what should we look for in our training environment? Was that it?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's the best environment that he should put himself in? Environment and even entourage, so that he could succeed in pro MMA. In terms of gym selection, coach selection, because sometimes people have what it takes to succeed. They have the will, they have the discipline, but then they're just their entourage is all wrong. Because they don't know any better, so they might train at a gym that's maybe subpar, so to speak, or they might train with like how do you maneuver so that you make the right choices, so that you increase your chances of being a successful pro, like whatever that may be.
That's an awesome question. And I'll tell you from my personal experience, I did everything wrong in my professional career. I did everything wrong, and I made every single mistake, and I paid for it dearly. And because of that, I've become the coach that I am today. And so if I were to go back in time and give myself this type of advice, I suppose here's what I would say. Surround yourself with people that you can trust with your life. And that includes your coaches, that includes your training partners, your sparring partners especially. Sparring is such an important thing. And a lot of people do this wrong because they confuse sparring with fighting. And this is how it was when I was coming up. Every sparring session was a fight. The sparring sessions were more dangerous than the actual fights. We got hurt way more in the sparring sessions than we did in the fights, and it sucked. And it gave us PTSD. And So I go into these fights held back by my sparring instead of advanced by it. I would go into these fights thinking, I don't want what happened in sparring to happen in this fight, and I would cringe, and I would I would be a shadow of my potential. So it is super important that you surround yourself with sparring partners that you can trust, people that you know you can spar with without getting injured, people who have your best interest in mind, right? People who want you to progress instead of just trying to put a notch on their belt, like, yeah, I kicked his butt. It is super important to have a coach who wants you to progress, as opposed to a coach who wants to be the center of attention. And this is a big problem with a lot of potential coaches out there. They want to be the center of attention. A lot of people have been asking me lately what I think about what's his name, Joshua Fabian, the coach of blanking on his name, recently retired UFC fighter Diego Sanchez. And I don't know anything about this man personally, and I don't want to say anything negative about him. Diego Sanchez is a man I respect a lot. He's proved himself over and over again in the cage, in the UFC. He's done tremendous things. And recently on the internet, these videos have surfaced of Joshua Fabian and Diego Sanchez doing some goofy things together, like hanging upside down, and Joshua's like punching him in the head and stuff. I'm like, okay, obviously that's not a training method that people should use, and I don't know why they're doing that, but okay, that's probably not something we should publish, because there are people out there who want to emulate Diego Sanchez and do what he does and train the way he trains and so on, and get the results that he got, and they're not going to by hanging upside down and having somebody punch them in the head. Okay. But the thing that I would criticize Joshua Fabian for is the public appearances that I've seen him make, where he made it about him instead of about his fighter. And I don't know if you've seen these videos, but instead of promoting his fighter, instead of saying, my guy is a good fighter, this is why he's going to win, this is what he's going to do, this is his moment, it's all about him, it's like, everybody look at me. And that's problematic. That's not the type of coach I would want in my corner. And again, I'm feeling a little remiss. I don't want this to come across as a bagging on Joshua Fabian episode here, but yeah, if I were to offer some constructive criticism to him, I would say, just make your focus lifting Diego up as opposed to putting yourself in the limelight. Like if you look at most fighters, most people don't know who their coaches are. I mean, once in a while we'll have a celebrity coach like Firas Zahabi. People know him because he trained George St. Pierre, and he's got a successful YouTube channel. Greg Jackson, people know him because they've talked about him enough in the UFC. He's made enough public appearances and so on that people know his name. But I mean, name a UFC fighter. Just name one off the top of your head.
Okay, Israel Adesanya.
Okay, who is his coach? Who is his main coach? No, I don't know either. Name another UFC fighter, like on the current UFC roster. Which one?
Okay. No, I was gonna say Yoel, but then you said that's currently in the UFC. Okay, how about Oliveira, Charles Oliveira? He just became.
Oliveira. All right, perfect. Who's his head coach?
No idea.
No idea. Okay. And that's the way it should be, really. I mean, I say that as a coach who, you know, I depend on athletes coming to me for essentially my paycheck, right? But even so, even though pushing myself into the limelight is profitable for me, that's not what I'm about, right? And what do those coaches do? Why are Israel Adesanya and Charles Oliveira, why are they successful? Because, well, how did their coaches help them to become successful? By giving them the best opportunities they could to give them experiences that allowed them to win fights, basically. And that's it. By helping them along the way, not by exalting themselves and putting themselves first. And this is a big problem with traditional martial arts versus combat sports. We do see it in combat sports, but not as much, because the coaches have a vested interest in making sure their athletes win. They have a vested interest in making sure their athletes are better than they ever were, right? Whereas with traditional martial arts, it's often about essentially worshiping the sensei, worshiping the sifu, worshiping the guru, if you will. And everybody defers to his judgment. Everybody defers to his power. Like, nobody can show him up. Nobody can be better than the master. Nobody can be better than Bruce Lee in the Church of Jeet Kune Do, for example. Whereas I think, you know, going back to Bruce Lee again, I think he would hate that, because I think he wanted martial artists to be better than they were. That's what he was all about. He wanted martial arts in general to be better than it was. He wanted it to be something something far beyond what people at his time could have imagined. Right? And so a MMA coach needs to have this same vision for his fighters. He needs to do everything in his power to make sure they are better than he ever could have been. As far as an entourage, man. First of all, don't go out of your way and to blow money on a fake entourage, man. I know some fighters have done this. They throw money at people trying to look cool. Stop trying to look cool and just focus on results, man. Be a very results driven person as far as fighting goes. Does it work? Great. Do more of it. Does it not work? Get rid of it. I was having a conversation about entourage just the other day with one of my students, and he brought up, I don't remember which fighter. No, it wasn't a fighter. It was a professional NBA player. I don't remember which one. But this man is fabulously wealthy, and not just because of his success in the NBA, but because of all these investments and so on that he made. But his entourage was basically, he hired his trusted friends that he grew up with to work for him. Not to be yes men, but to work for him, to join his team. And as a result, he was tremendously successful. So essentially what he did was this formula I'm laying out for you here right now. Surround yourself with people that you can trust, that people you can trust with your success. I have this experience quite a bit, where a fighter will be disillusioned with his current coach or his current gym, and then they will come to me looking for something different. And then they will go away disgruntled because they're getting the same results, and I'll tell you why. Okay. So I had this experience fairly recently. A fighter came to my gym, and he's basically like, my other coaches suck, my other team sucks. Let's see what you can do for me. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's see how you are. And you know, this guy, I can see right away he's kind of a lazy guy who expects the work to be done for him as opposed to be putting in the work. And he's got a fight coming up in 2 weeks' time. And he is essentially asking me, make me win with only 2 weeks of training with you. I'm like, dude, this is not how it works. It's not how it works. Like, we need a long period of consistent training to get different results. Okay. And he's like, well, I have a fight in 2 weeks. Do what you can. I'm like, all right, I'll do what I can. But, you know, the difference between now and 2 weeks from now is going to be fairly minimal. He didn't like that answer. He goes out, he loses this fight. He gets upset, he leaves, goes on to another gym, has the same exact results, goes on to another gym. And this is not an isolated incident. I see this a lot. So a fighter has to take personal ownership. They have to take responsibility for their own actions. They have to take responsibility for their own losses and for their own wins. Now, there are better coaches than others. Like if a coach is having you hang upside down while he punches you in the head, probably not the best coach. Okay, probably not the best training methods. That's probably a big red flag. Okay, but yeah, there are athletes who will succeed regardless of who they train with. Like, you know, Ronda Rousey was competing, for example. A lot of people reamed her coach, and I think a lot of that was unfair judgment because, you know, after Ronda lost a couple of fights, people were like, "Ha ha, her coach sucks," and you know, there was that whole, you know, head movement meme. But Ronda was one of those fighters who I think would have succeeded regardless of who was coaching her, regardless of who she had in her corner. She would have had a similar level of success and a similar level of failure, I believe, regardless of who was coaching her. And I think that's specifically because she was a self-motivated fighter. Whereas when you have a guy who feels like the coach needs to hold his hand, do everything for him, that's a guy who needs to work on his own personal initiative. So this is one thing I would stress to fighters: make sure you cut the apron strings, become an independent, self-motivated man. Okay, a coach is tremendously helpful. A good coach is tremendously helpful. And you know, when I was fighting, I went in there without a coach. I went in there without cornermen. I showed up to fights without a cornerman. I was that guy. And I experienced a proportionate level of success to the amount of effort I put into it, which was fairly mediocre. And if I could go back in time and tell myself something, I would say, get a coach. And I would probably say, well, which coach? And my response would be, go to the closest gym you could find, sign up, get that coach, right? And just be committed to the process. And that probably sounds like terrible advice to a lot of people who have a lot of opportunities to pick and choose between gyms. Okay, if that's great, go try them out. See which one feels like the best fit for you. Stick to that, right? But yeah, people are so obsessed with finding the best thing, the best gym, the best coach, the best team. Best is so relative. It's incredibly relative. For some people out there, I'm the best coach for them. And for other people, I might be the absolute worst coach for them. Right? For some people out there, you know, you are probably the best martial arts coach for a lot of fighters out there. You might not know it, they might not know it, but you probably have something that will resonate very deeply with a certain set of people that could push them to success in professional mixed martial arts if that's what you wanted to do. Okay? And maybe that's not something that interests you. And then for a lot of people, that would not be the case. And you could say the same thing with, you know, Greg Jackson, Firas Zahabi. You know, they're excellent coaches. I trained with one of Firaz's guys came to train. He came and trained at my gym for a while, for about 3 months, and the dude was awesome. And he was a great athlete and, you know, a phenomenal grappler. And we had a lot of we had a lot of fun training with the guy. And he was just an absolute testament to the fact that Firas is a good coach and a good trainer. But is he the best possible coach for everyone? I mean, I think it would be silly to say that, because everybody resonates on different wavelengths with different people. And it's entirely possible, going back to Joshua Fabian, I don't even remember the dude's name, Diego's coach, Diego Sanchez's coach. Maybe, just maybe, they are a good fit for each other. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there's some method behind the madness of hanging upside down. I don't know. Not something I would do or recommend anyone. But maybe there's a method to that madness.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe cocaine is a hell of a drug, you know?
and maybe Frank Dukes won the Kumite after all. But the point I'm trying to get across is, you know, pick a path and stick to it. Because, you know, Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid Part 1, terrible karate teacher, great life advice, in my opinion. When Daniel LaRusso in that movie was kind of waffling, should I or shouldn't I, Mr. Miyagi gave some great advice. He talks about a grape in the middle of the road getting squashed by a car. He's like, all right, you karate, yes, that okay. You karate, no, that okay. You karate, maybe. Then squash, just like grape.
Well, you ever heard the saying, in the middle is where you get, you know, the most F, you know?
Indeed. So I'm kind of a man of extremes. When I find something I'm interested in, I get really interested in it. When I get going on something, I just really get going on it, and I stick to it to the point where other people are like, you're still doing that thing, right? Why? Because I'm a nerd. That's what nerds do. Nerds are pedantic about the details. Nerds fixate on the stuff nobody else cares about. That's why martial artists are nerds, right? We're the nerds who got beaten up in high school, who got our heads stuck in the toilets, who got stuffed into lockers, who got, you know, just mercilessly reamed by our peers. And so we learned how to fight with this childhood dream. Like, if I learn martial arts, I'll be able to fight back against the bullies. And because we were such nerds, that's why we get good at martial arts. Because we fixate on the details, because we are people of extremes, right? So you said you want to be a world champion in judo.
Oh.
And I think that is awesome. I have a friend, Matt Grant. I did a podcast with him. He is now a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He is a multiple-time IBJJF world champion in like the Master 6 and the Master 7 division. He started Jiu-Jitsu, I think he was 52 years old when he took his first Jiu-Jitsu class. 52 years old, yeah. And he, you know, won world titles at blue belt, at purple belt, and also at brown belt. And again, this shocks a lot of people because they assume, you know, I'm over a certain age, so I can't even start. One of the most common questions I'm asked on my channel is, Ramsey, am I too old to start? Which I think is a ridiculous question. You know, it would make more sense if they were saying, is it reasonable to believe that I could become a UFC champion at this age? You know, there's maybe not if you're 50 years old, but is it too old to start martial arts? No. Is it too old to set reasonable, accomplishable goals? No, absolutely not. How often do you get questions like that? Am I too old to start? Do you ever hear that sort of thing?
Oh man, yeah. I get a lot of questions like that, like in the comment section, by email. And you know, the funny thing is, I get some of those questions. I would say maybe 10, 20% are actually from people who are, you know, 40 and over, you know, or in their 50s or 60s. But most of it are from guys who are like in their 20s or 30s.
Yes.
And I'm like,
Yes.
well, what do you mean? I'm 42, bro. I started at 36. You know,
I
so like,
know.
of course, it's possible. But
It's
I
like
think
the
it's what you
younger
said,
they
right?
are, the more they doubt themselves.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that it's just people in North America, they're we're not used to seeing people who are older and who are super fit and who are super active. You know, by the time most, like you said, guys, once they finish college and they start working, they have kids, a family, it's over. You know, like 30, 35, they're completely out of shape, and then it's only even more downhill from there until they start, getting a bunch of diseases and high blood pressure, cholesterol. So they're not used to that. So for them, like being 30 years old or 25, starting at that age seems to be like too late.
Mm.
But really, it's not. It's not.
Ah,
Like of course you're not going to change overnight. It's going to take time, but how much time it takes, it's going to be dependent on a lot of factors, right? But if you want to do something, then just do it. It's definitely not impossible. And that's kind of part of my thing on YouTube is that um, you know, on YouTube, I talk about fitness and martial arts. And when I started my channel, I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about, but I know it was fitness and martial arts. And then
yeah.
as the channel grew, and because I had a couple of ups and downs with the channel, meaning I started it, and then I kind of quit, I kind of stopped, and then I started again, then I stopped, and then, anyways, and then at one point I really decided to give it a go. When I finally realized that, you know what, I think I'm gonna share my journey, and now that I'm a trainer, that I'm gonna talk about training at the same time in my journey, about what I want to do. So my thing is that when I was a kid, uh, I watched Bruce Lee, and I was like,
Yeah.
holy shit, I want to be like that guy. I want to
Yes.
be the guy that kicks ass and that's super cool and muscular and all that. And so that's how I started. So I just watched his movies and I was obsessed with Bruce Lee. I was obsessed with ninjas. I was with watching G.I. Joe, Transformers. He-Man was amazing. That was like the ultimate cartoon. He would just scream in the air with his sword and
And
I
then he
got the
got the
power.
power, right?
Yeah, he's like, by the power of Grayskull, and then he just goes insane, and then he turns his cat into a lion and everything. So, anyways, I was watching Hulk Hogan pro wrestling, so I was like, man, yeah, I want to be, but Bruce Lee had the biggest impact, so I wanted to get into martial arts, and then what happened after that? So my parents let me start martial arts when I was 13, and I started doing kung fu. So I did Shaolin Hung Gar Kung Fu for 2 years,
Yeah.
and it was after 2 years of learning forms and I got to my purple satch. Then I realized like, hey, wait a second, I'm not learning how to fight. I want to
Mhm.
fight. So then from there I realized, okay, well, my uncle told me, hey, why don't you try Taekwondo? They do a lot of sparring. So I'm like, okay. So I told my parents, all right, this kung fu shit it's not happening. Let's do taekwondo. Yeah, yeah. So I got myself into taekwondo, and it was sparring, so it was fun. So I thought I knew how to fight all of a sudden because I'm kicking the bag. I'm doing light sparring all the time at the club. Like when I mean light, I mean without the chest protector.
Yeah.
Just like we're tapping each other, but we're going relatively fast. But there's some control. And then from there, I wanted to compete and go to the Olympics. I'm like, yeah, this is for me. I'm gonna be Olympic champion. Now the problem with my parents was that, well, we came over to Canada when I was 2 years old after the Vietnam War.
Okay.
So we were essentially boat people. So them, it was all about survival, giving me and my sister an education, and that was it. And sports was just like something you do for on the side to be healthy. So they didn't want to um, invest in me continuing moving up the ranks in Taekwondo because the school where I was at, like you had to pay for every belt promotion, and
Mhm.
then the sensei at that time wanted me to get to my black belt as soon as possible because he supposedly saw that I had some talent and he wanted me to get to black belt so I could start competing and obviously represent his school and hopefully get some results. So I talked to my parents about that, but my parents didn't want to invest in that. They're like, no, 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 no. You're just doing this for fun. We're not paying for belt promotions. We're not paying for competitions, for nothing. So then at one point, I'm like, that kind of crushed my dreams. And that was a childhood dream of mine to be to go to the Olympics. So then, anyways, fast forward in my 20s and 20s until 30s. So then I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. From 16 to 19, I was doing Taekwondo. And after that, when I realized that, okay, well, there's no future for me in Taekwondo because, well, parents aren't going to pay for it. And at that time, I was so young. I didn't know anything. So I didn't know that I could, possibly get a job and finance myself and figure out a way. Besides, I wasn't allowed to. Like in an Asian family, you're not allowed to. All you had to do is study. That's it. You're not allowed to get a job. I wanted to get a job. They didn't let me. So anyways, so from there, then I started getting bullied in school. When I was 13, I was getting bullied in school. And then from there, what happened? Because of that bullying experience, it kind of traumatized me in a way because I really wanted to learn how to fight because I wanted to get back at this bully. So I started getting into gangs. Towards when I was 19, 20, I started getting into a lot of gang stuff. And because I felt as though I needed to prove myself as a man, I need to be around people, I need to fight and all that. And so, and that eventually led me in my 20s to become a drug dealer. Kind of a crazy story. So from 20 until about 29, I was a drug dealer. And I wasn't a bad guy. I was just doing bad stuff.
This actually isn't that uncommon of a story among martial artists that I know.
Oh yeah? Okay, thank God. Okay, and then after that, I essentially got busted at one point. So I did some time. I went inside for about 18 months. That wasn't the first time. It was just the longest stretch that I ever did, and it was the last time. So then I got out at the age of 30, and that's when I decided, okay, from 30 years old, I got out and I decided not to do any of that anymore. So I'm like, okay, well, what I'm gonna do with my life? Okay, I'll just start. I guess I'll get a job and then I'll try to figure things out from there. And that's what I was trying to do. But at the same time, when I got out, I actually started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the age of 30, and that had a really good impact in my life. And funny story too is that I actually discovered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when I was in jail.
Really?
I had
How did that go?
Okay, so I was in a cell. I was in a cell and it was bunk beds, right? So I had this cellmate and his name, I forgot what his real name was, but his prison name or his street name was Capone.
Okay.
And Capone was a funny guy. He would freestyle rap and stuff like that, and he was kind of annoying, but he made jokes all the time. So we were friends inside. And then from there, at one point, we started wrestling because he would always come up to me and say, "Hey, you want me to break your face?" And I said, "Yeah, I want." And he would always say that jokingly, and then I would shove him, and it would be the end of it. But this time, he said that. I shoved him. He shoved me back, and he's like, "You want to go?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's go." So then we started wrestling, but it was friendly, and he got me into this silly. Like back then, I didn't know what was happening. I thought it was like, "Oh my God, it's magic." But essentially, he got an underhook, and then he just gable gripped it, and then he pushed down on my shoulder, and he had my head pressed down, and he was kind of on top. I'm not sure how to describe that, but it was a very simple position where he has an underhook, it's over my shoulder, and he's pressing down like that. And I couldn't move because my shoulder was pressed down. So then I asked him, hey, wait, show me that. And he's like, I'm like, well, what is that? What is that you just did? And he's like, oh man, that's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, man. And he told me, man, you got to do this shit. Like, once you get out of here, man, you do that for 3 months, and you could kick the crap out of anybody. And he's like, I only did it for 3 months, and I can manhandle anybody in here. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, man. You definitely got to do that when you get out. That's the shit, So I'm like,
so what you're saying is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is good for the streets.
No, I'm saying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu might be good for you in a jail cell where there's not a lot of space with somebody who doesn't know anything
Ah,
and who's about your size or smaller. So yeah. So anyways,
ah,
so when I get out of jail, I'm like, okay, fine. I'm not doing this anymore. So let's try to figure something out. But I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I trained, from 30 to 36 in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Then after that, I went over to Judo when I was 36. And then at the age of, so between 30 and about 40, that's when, I was jumping from job to job, trying to find myself, trying to start different businesses. None of that worked out. And then at one point, I just decided that, you know what? I'm kind of tired of this running after money, running after something that's, I'm just going to do what I enjoy doing. So I'm going to live in a gym because I like working out and I like to train martial arts. So that's what I'm going to do. So the way I'm going to do that is to pay my bills is to go work at a gym and become a trainer. Might as well. So that's what I did. And then from there, I also realized that, wait a second, why not? And then when I started judo, I started competing. And when I was doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I competed, but I never had good success there. Only towards the last competition that I did I didn't even win, but I actually performed well despite having lost. You know how it is. Sometimes your performance
yeah,
was good. You're really happy about it, but you still lost because the guy was just better than you. But
yeah,
you weren't ashamed of your performance, so to speak, right?
yes.
So
Those are interesting moments.
yeah. That was a very interesting moment, and that I remember my coach at that time in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He told me that right there, that fight. Now you're a real competitor. Everything else prior to that, like the 10 other competitions you did, that was just you like going through the motions and learning. But then after that, I stopped because I essentially switched clubs. But then after that, when I switched clubs, I switched BJJ clubs. I didn't compete anymore because I didn't feel like it because it was expensive also. BJJ competitions are expensive compared to
Yes,
judo.
they are, man. Yeah,
Exactly.
there's a jiu-jitsu competition coming up next month, and I'm I want to do it, but it's like $100 US just to sign up for the thing, and I'm like, do I really want to though? What else could I spend that money on? But yeah, man,
Well, at
it's
that price, you could do like two free judo competitions if you know.
yeah, and at the same time, coming from a after having been paid to compete, paying to compete just doesn't make sense. It doesn't. It's weird. It's like, no, I'm putting myself at risk. I deserve monetary compensation. That's how fighting works in my mind, you know? But yeah, paying to compete is weird.
Yeah, no, I could understand that perfectly. So to just so I could wrap up the story, right? And so when I switched over to judo, that's when I started. My coach said, "Listen, you should compete." I'm like, "Depends. How much is it?" He told me, "Well, it's like $20 a competition." And I'm like, "$20 for $20? I'll do all the damn competitions year round." Because that was the limiting factor for me in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It was so expensive.
Yeah,
Like you would literally had to get like a part-time job just to pay for competitions and expenses and hotels and all that. So I'm like, okay, for judo at $20 a pop, yeah, let's go. So I started competing in judo. First season was a disaster because I couldn't get over um, the fight, like you talked about, the anxiety of it all. But
yes.
then my coaches, they saw that and they told me, well, listen, you're not performing the way you perform in the club. So you're probably just nervous. What we're going to do is you're going to do every single competition for the rest of the season.
Good.
And then I started winning. So now I started winning and I found my groove. So every fighter is different about regarding their mindset, how they prepare for it, how they think about it and all that. But me, like the mindset that works for me, and I tried a couple. I tried being the hyping myself up and being the ultra aggressive guy that's gonna come in there and rip the guy's head off and I'm a killer and blah blah blah. That didn't work. And then I
Yeah.
tried, okay, maybe if I come in and I'm ultra relaxed and I don't take it seriously and I'm just there for fun, that didn't work out either.
Yeah.
So then finally after competing and doing it over and over, I got so desensitized to the fight because you come in you walk like the first time you walk on I know it's only judo, but you walk onto the mats, it's a big competition. You see like a couple of hundred guys, man,
Yeah.
running around. Like they take a whole surface area, like half of the space is taken up just for the warm-ups. For okay, this is the adults are fighting now. We're gonna warm up, so it's a group warm-up. You see all the judokas like on the mat, they start running around, they start warming up and stuff like that, and it's intimidating. The lights, the flash, the refs and all that. But then after a while, you get so desensitized to that because at one point I was just going there and I'm like, okay, it's the same thing over and over again. So I was even taking naps like in between my fights, literally taking naps. I brought my sleeping bag, and I would literally eat and take naps until it was my turn, and then my coaches would come and kick me and, hey, it's your turn, get dressed, get warmed up, it's time to go. I'm like, oh, okay. So anyways, I started performing.
You gotta watch out for the guys who can sleep before a fight, man. Those are some scary dudes.
Yeah, and so I got to the point where okay, now I don't have that anxiety anymore because it's just another competition, whatever, no big deal. And the mindset that worked for me at this point, I feel I don't feel anxiety, I don't feel any fear. I'm really out there to have fun. I get excited now. And in my mind, it's about, okay, this is where I get to showcase like what I'm about, and I'm gonna kick this guy's butt. But it's excited. I'm excited, but I'm focused. But
Yeah.
I'm there to show off, if that makes any sense.
No, that absolutely makes sense. Like nervousness and excitement are almost the same emotion. They're almost. It's just they're translated so very differently in the mind. So it's like we have to get to the point where we can choose to be excited instead of nervous.
Oh yeah, because this is the fun part. Like to me now, I chose excitement because I've noticed that I perform my best when I'm excited, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna beat this dude up. I'm gonna show him what's real judo, or whatever, and I'm focused, I'm not nervous, so it keeps me at a place where I'm on, but not too on. I'm not overly aggressive or anything like that. I'm just there. I'm focused. I'm there to win, but I'm having a lot of fun. For me, it works tremendously well. And in the big scheme of things, it's just a competition. Who cares? To be honest,
Yeah.
So whether I win or lose, it doesn't matter. Obviously, I'm gonna play to win. But if I lose, I mean, I've lost so much my whole life, and at the same time during all those previous matches and competitions until I finally got the hang of it. That to me, losing is actually no big deal because I've done more losing than winning. But now I'm starting to win, and now my coaches are telling me, like he's starting to tell me like, hey, listen, like the way you're going about it, the way you're training, like you really have the potential to be a somebody in the judo world in Montreal, and you could win against guys like in your division, like if you keep training. And that's where I started thinking about it, and then I'm like, wait a second, this is what I wanted when I was a kid. I wanted to go to the Olympics. I wanted to be a world champion or Olympic champion in a combat sport. So I'm like, well, what's stopping me now? So I thought about it, and I'm like, shit, let's do it. Let's go. So my channel now is really about when I'm on my channel, I talk to my community, and I'm always like, this is what I'm about. Like me, I like to train, and the training is really to supplement my judo. And I'm 42, and I'm going after my childhood dream at this point, and I'm gonna go win a world title. And that's so I want people to like come and hang out with me and see the journey. So I'm gonna share that on YouTube. So that's my whole thing, and to show people that it's possible to be at a very high level even at 42, right? So I still have to get the black belt now because of COVID. Things are closed, or else I would have gotten it by now, I believe. But when things open up again, get the black belt, and after that, just compete until I get that world title. And also, I have to find a way to make it work, because the thing is, it's not like I'm on the national team or anything. I gotta, essentially fund myself. So that's where it gets a little bit, I wouldn't say tricky, but that's what I'm working towards, is essentially my only goal, the only reason I actually want to make money in life at this point is so I could train and compete.
All right.
I don't really care about anything else, like it's like I don't have any kids, like I have a dog, I have a wife and all, that's and I love them, of course, but I don't care about anything else. Money doesn't matter to me. Like whether I'm rich or poor, it doesn't matter. Like the only reason I want money, it's not to be just to have money for money's sake. It's about me getting a world title.
Yeah,
That's
it is
all it's
super
about.
important to define your priorities like that. And that's another thing I would go back and tell my younger self. Define your priorities and set some goals and set lofty goals. Like that's a lofty goal. Be a world champion in your sport, right? And that's one of those things that the average person thinks that's not attainable, whatever, that's a pipe dream. Set lofty goals. When I started competing, I told myself, well, I just did it for the money. Like I just needed, in a great twist of irony, I started fighting professionally to pay medical bills because healthcare is ridiculous in America, and couldn't afford it, and I had medical bills to pay, and I needed an extra $50 every month just to make that minimum payment. And I was working 3 jobs, and the only way I could think of to make an extra $50 every month was prize fighting. And so I started kickboxing and all that, and then MMA and Muay Thai. And my only goal was survive, don't get injured badly enough where I'm going to compound my medical bills and get that paycheck, and that's it. If I could go back in time, I would tell myself, set some loftier goals. Set a goal to get into the UFC, which I would have laughed at myself for. I would have been like, no, I'm not that guy. I'm not good enough for that. But I would go back in time and tell myself, so what? Set a lofty goal. You will never ever accomplish anything greater than the goals that you set. So I love the fact that what you brought up about losing. It is super important for us to learn to lose, not to be losers, but to learn to lose, right? So that we're not afraid of it, because that's something that holds competitors back in every sport, the fear of losing. Because fear is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is. What you are afraid of the most will happen to you. For example, if you're afraid of spiders, you will run into spiders all the time, and they will scare you all the time, and you will live in fear of spiders all the time, right? If you're not afraid of spiders, you won't really notice them. Even if they're crawling on the wall, you won't notice them because they're not a big deal. They don't scare you, right? And if you're afraid of losing, what's going to happen? Oh man, those losses, you know, the, even if you win most of the time, those losses will haunt you, right? But if you're not afraid of it and you focus on the success, that's what you're going to experience most of the time. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah, no, but that makes perfect sense, because what you focus on, for extended periods of time, that's what's going to find a way to manifest itself into your life, right? So if if
Yeah,
you're afraid of fear, if you're afraid of failure or you're afraid of losing, and that's all you could think about, well, that's going to reflect in the way you perform, on the type of decisions you make, like during that fight or during that match. So confidence is a big thing. It's like you need to, and I think that confidence comes from, I think the best way I would describe how to get that confidence is through clarity.
hmm.
So what does clarity look like to me? Clarity comes from, well, practice, putting in the work, and having been in those uncomfortable situations so many times that you could get out of it. You can handle it. And that comes down to when we're talking about drilling, and drilling certain sequences and then making it progressively harder each time, and then breaking it up, and then using the whole sequence, and so on and so on. And yeah, I think that if you spend enough time in uncomfortable situations and you have that confidence, that clarity, that you know exactly what to do when you're in that position to get out of it, so you're confident, then after that, forgot where I was going with this, but I was talking about confidence. I was talking
Yes.
about clarity, confidence, and then yeah. So when you have that confidence afterwards, like you have to, you got to nurture it, and you have to essentially be very aware of what's going on in your mind, and that's the hardest thing for us as humans, because we have monkey brains. It just goes all over the place. Like if I tell you right now, Ramsey, whatever you do, don't think of monkeys. And if you don't think of monkeys, I'll give you $1 million. But
It's
don't
too
think of
late,
monkeys.
man. It's too late. I'm remembering this awesome YouTube video I saw once of monkeys doing flying jump kicks and knocking people off of scooters. It was incredible. I can't find it anymore, but it was, I wish I could. It's the most amazing YouTube video. Monkeys doing flying side kicks and knocking people off of their bikes. It's like
Oh
a
yeah.
whole compilation of it.
But you're talking about real monkeys or like
Real
animation?
monkeys, real live monkeys. Like, um, what is the bike equivalent of carjacking? Like bike jacking people, like stealing people's bikes after knocking them off. Monkeys can be brutal, man. There used to be a lot of monkey handlers on the street that I live on here in Shanghai, here on Wuzhong Road. It's there used to be these like panhandlers with monkeys that would be trained and do tricks and stuff, and people would give them money, and the monkeys would go over and take the coins out of their hands, and people would be like, "Oh, it's so cute." But one of these monkeys, there was this one monkey, and it was missing its tail, and this monkey was the meanest monkey on the block. And so my wife and I, this is the first time we meet the tailless monkey, and she wants to give it a peanut. She's like, "Here, little monkey, have a peanut." The monkey comes up, grabs the peanut out of her hand, slaps her across the face, and then runs away. And my
No
wife has
way.
this, yes, she's like, "Did the monkey just slap me?" I'm like, "Yes, you just got slapped by a monkey." So every time we see the tailless monkey, we're like, stay away from that thing. Um, anyway,
Oh
monkeys
man.
they've got attitude, some of them, and some
Oh
monkeys don't like people.
well, that one like probably got his tail chopped off by some human or something like that. I'm guessing
Probably,
maybe that's why he has such a big attitude.
probably.
Yeah,
Oh,
so you see, so now if you were to tell yourself, okay, don't think about a monkey. No, you're trying not to think of, but just the fact that you're trying not to think of a monkey, you're thinking of a monkey. So that's why trying to think of not losing is actually gonna increases your chances of losing than if
yeah.
you just play. You got to replace it with, like I'm gonna win with confidence, but with confidence, for confidence to arise to be there in a real way, you have to have clarity. Because confidence without clarity is just you're just being delusional. You're just
Yeah.
hyping yourself, and it's just false bravado. It's like, oh yeah, I'm the toughest man on the planet. Yeah, I'll
Real
just let him punch me a couple
confidence
of times.
is competence, right? Those two words are interconnected. If we are not competent, we can't actually be confident. I think I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking about losing a fight. Like, I get challenged to fights on the internet like every day. People send me messages and emails and just all kinds of messages challenging me to like fights. Come, just telling me how badly they would beat me up. And sometimes I read these and I think, what would actually happen if I showed up to this fight? And occasionally these guys will have videos of themselves fighting, and most of them are just absolute jokes. But I think to myself, what would happen if I fought this guy? And I started asking myself these questions. Well, if I lost, how would I lose? And I think that's a super important question for combat sports athletes to ask themselves when they are nervous. If I lost, how would I lose? Because I think you know how you would lose. Like if your grappling sucks, you're probably going to be exploited by a superior grappler. If you don't know how to box, you're probably going to get knocked out by the guy who does, and so on. So what that tells you is how you need to improve. If you can if you have this fear of losing, it's because you know how you're going to lose. And so because of that, we know how to become competent enough so that we don't, so that we can gain the confidence that we can actually win.
Yeah, I like that. I like that word even better than clarity. Like confidence comes from competence, and competence, well, you know, it can only be gained through practice, right? Practice, and that's where you get that competence, and that's where it becomes confidence, and then from there, I wouldn't say that you have that invincible mindset, so to speak, but you know that anywhere the fight goes, like you'll be fine. And then of course you're gonna try to dictate and come up with strategies and tactics to take the fight where you want to go to exploit the other's weakness and all that. That's great. But yeah, definitely. That's something. I forgot how the conversation started, but oh yeah, you were talking about how losing. It's important to know how to lose, I think.
Yeah.
And then we just
And
went on.
also how you're going to lose. I mean, think about this. Like, think about your training partners, like your best training partners, like the guys who can beat you when you train, the guys who can throw you any way they want, the guys who can pin you, the guys who can submit you, right? Think about one of these guys, and when you're going to train with him, do you ever think to yourself like, oh man, he's probably going to beat me, and he's probably going to do it with this move or that move or this strategy? Does that thought process ever happen?
100%. I got a guy right here, right now. This guy, I noticed that when I fight him, I'm always worried because I know he has like, this is what he does to me. This is this is the couple of things that he does to me all the time, and he
Yeah.
does it when he wants to, and so because of that, I always have this fear of attack, of putting on, of going for it 100% in my attacks,
Mm,
judo. And then when I do that, because I hesitate, I'm halfway in, but then I stop. Then from there he counters me.
yeah.
But then and he even told me that he's like, because I asked him, hey man, like I have a really hard time. I'm always, like what do you think is wrong with my judo? This guy used to be on the national team, and
Hmm.
he's what 170, 170 pounds, but like all muscle. He has like no fat on him. And super
Yeah.
explosive. One of those athletes. And he told me, well, the problem with you, he told me, and he was referring to me. The problem with you is that you come in you come in halfway. You come in with
Mm.
not 100%. And he said, if you do that to me, I could feel it. So if you stop halfway through your movement, or even 70% through your movement, you're going 3/4 of the way, let's say, but then you hesitate, you're screwed because I'm gonna feel it, and I'm gonna counter you right there on the spot, and that's what's happening to you. So he
Just
said you have to
bring me out.
go 100.
Do karate, make me wash just like grape.
Huh? Yeah, exactly. The grape. And that's it. So I'm the grape with this guy, and he told me with me you got to go 100%. So I won't be able to counter you. Worst case, you miss, and then you reset again, or you just follow up with another attack. But if you half-ass it, I'm gonna get you, and that's what's happening with you. So he said, so now it's still a mental block that I'm working on for this particular guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, this guy really like. There's two guys on my clubs who had this effect on me, and I'm still working on it, right? Because these
Yeah.
guys are a
But
couple of
isn't that
steps.
interesting? Like before you even get on the mat with them, you know exactly how they would beat you, right? Like they're not going to surprise you with how they beat you, are they? They're not going to pull out some crazy flying triple upside down move you've never seen before. They're probably
Oh
going to use
no,
a strategy that you've already succumbed to, right?
it's the same 3-4 techniques he does on me all the time, all the time. It's just
Yeah.
that it's not like he's doing any magic tricks or anything like that. Like, okay, the first couple of times I fought him, like I didn't know what his usual attacks are, but now I know. So that's the thing. Even when you know, but because
Yeah.
you have this, he's because he's done it to you so many times, you think that it's gonna be like that again, and because of self-defeating belief, if
Yeah,
you know, then yeah, that's what happens.
indeed. Indeed. I had this experience with one of my training partners, my friend Carlos. He's a jiu-jitsu brown belt, and he's got this death grip on his right hand where if he gets a hold of your lapel, he can just do horrible things to you. And I noticed something. Every time he grabbed my lapel with his right hand, my my left lapel with his right hand, he would always do the same thing. And so at first I felt that like sense of dread every time it was time to grapple with Carlos. And I was like, oh man, he's going to grab me with his death grip with his right hand and he's going to get that lapel and he's going to do that thing again. But then I had this thought one day, what if I grab his right hand before he can grab my lapel? And so I tried it and I grabbed his right hand and then I'm able to arm drag him. Like, whoa, that happened differently this time. So for a while I kept envisioning me losing the same way, if you will. Like he's going to grab the lapel, he's going to do the thing, and then I'm going to lose. He's going to grab the lapel, he's going to do the thing, then I'm going to lose. But when we can address the root of the problem, like, if the problem is just that right hand is the big enemy. If we can find a way to neutralize that and build an offensive strategy around that, and as your training partner point out, don't approach it halfway, but go all in, we can find a way around that. Now, not saying that's going to be easy, but and they're going to adapt around your adaptation, which is what forces growth, of course, because eventually you'll figure out a way to beat this guy to the punch, if you will, and then he's going to figure out a way to compensate for it the way you compensated for his strategy. And he's going to build a new strategy. Then you're going to have to build a new one, right? And it goes back and forth, and it's an amazing process, right? Because
Oh
as soon as
yeah.
I arm dragged my friend Carlos, what did he do? He adapted his game plan. So when I tried arm dragging again, he adapted, right? And so I had to come up with a new strategy. I'm going to attack him on the other side, and then suddenly he's defending both sides, and then it just becomes more complex, right?
Yeah,
Because we
absolutely.
have to. But it's a beautiful thing because when we fight somebody new, somebody that has not adapted to us, suddenly we're the better fighter in that situation because we've been through all of those possible scenarios. And so they don't surprise us. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
instead of just focusing on how we're going to lose, we can then focus on how we're going to win.
exactly. And like this makes me think of something my first judo coach told me. He told me the mark of a real black belt is that when you spar with him, um, you'll catch him once with something,
Yeah.
but then you won't be able to catch him a second time with that
Mm.
same technique. And that's a mark of a very good black belt, is that you might catch him one time with one particular throw, but then you'll go to round two. If you try that move again, he'll be able to stop you. He won't fall for it. He'll be able to get out of it or counter you or like shut you down. And he said that's when you know you're in front of a real advanced black belt. Like he's able to make the adjustments um, quickly. You know, not during the match, so to speak, but I mean, if he experiences it once, he'll know what to watch out for after that. So that's really interesting. And of course, as he makes the adjustments, then you have to make the adjustments because what worked the first time isn't going to work again. So you're going to have to set it up differently. And yeah, it's a very beautiful thing. So there's levels to the game. And black belt is really just the beginning. Like the way my coach used to describe it to me is that in judo, once you get to black belt, that's when you're finally with the big boys. It's
Yeah.
just the beginning. It doesn't mean you mastered anything. It just means now you get to play with the big boys. That's it.
This is a topic I want to talk about a little bit because I think, because I totally understand that. And I think because of the language that we use to express that idea, some people get the wrong idea that a black belt doesn't mean anything, or that a black belt, basically, black belts should not be good at fighting or good at their martial art. And because again, it's like that first level. Now you're playing with the big boys, if you will. But I get a ton of derogatory comments from martial artists who essentially tell me that that a black belt in any given martial art just means you have a super basic low level of competency. And I hate this idea because if you go back to the origins of the black, Jigoro Kano gave out two ranks originally, the black belt and the white belt. Black belt to instructors and white belt to students. And supposedly the instructors knew judo and they knew how to teach it, right? And then other martial arts like Taekwondo adopted, the black belt and karate adopted the belt system as well. And all these other martial arts now use belt systems because judo did, and they thought it was cool and it looked legit. And people like tying rank belts around their waists. But there are so many crappy martial artists out there wearing black belts who use this as an excuse saying, well, the black belt is just the first level. It's just a basic level of competency. And I'm like, you don't even know the forms of your martial art. You don't even know how to throw a punch. You don't even know how to make a fist. That's not a basic level of competency. I don't know how many terrible black belts in various martial arts you've met. I've met a lot. And I think the reason for this is just not because martial arts are inherently good or bad, because most people just kind of suck at martial arts. Because most people haven't put in the work and the effort to gain competency in martial arts. Like, people are always arguing on the internet, like, whether or not Aikido is good or not, whether or not Krav Maga is good or not. And I've made some videos to this effect where people ask me my opinion, and I told them, quite frankly, my opinion. This is the experience I've had with instructors and black belts in these martial arts and so on. And people get mad because my experience with most martial artists of most disciplines is they're not serious fighters. And this is true of almost everybody. And people get mad because they feel that's a reflection on their style, which they identify coming from the Latin idem, meaning the same as. I make myself the same as. That's what identify means. So if I identify with Aikido, for example, and some guy on the internet says Aikido sucks, that therefore is saying you suck as a person, right? And people get mad about this. They become tribal over these martial arts. So I'm expressing like 3 or 4 points at the same time here, but I loved how you phrased that the black belt in judo, it doesn't mean you're a master. It means you're playing with the big boys now, if you will. I love that. I love that, how you phrased that, because I mean, you can be good. You can be a good grappler without an advanced judo rank. Like, I've met many people who were, and again, as we discussed before, I've met many judo black belts of dubious level of skill, and I've met guys who were just absolute killers. How do you feel about belt inflation, if you will, about people who suck having black belts in martial arts versus people who are amazing at martial arts having the same exact rank?
Um, Wait, could you repeat that question? I mean, how do I feel
Yeah.
about people who have black belts and who suck, who can't fight, and
Yes.
about people who have black belts who can
People
fight?
with the same exact rank who can fight. Like,
Okay. Well, the thing is, if you get your black belt and you haven't sparred, there's no sparring in your martial art, or you just didn't spar, then you're gonna get the black belt regardless because of time spent. You're devoted. You're really a student of the game, but you just don't like to fight or whatever. Then of course, yeah, you won't be able to fight. It's because you only get good at what you do, what you practice.
yeah.
So if you practice doing forms, or you practice, you practice a lot of drills, so to speak, but you don't actually fight, then you're not going to get good at fighting. You'll get good at whatever it is that you're training at. So, if, for example, in Wing Chun, if you do a lot of sticky hands and you go like this and you go like that and you work a lot on the dummy, that's what you're going to get good at. But you don't actually get good at fighting, because fighting is the only way to get good at fighting is to fight. And so in the martial arts where they don't have sparring, but guys have trained for a long time and they get their black belt, and then from there, and that, I think that's where it comes from. They're like, okay, well, now that I have basic competence in, you know, in my art, I have a black belt, but I still can't fight because now it's the beginning. Well, that's because you never fought. For whatever reason, your club like didn't allow sparring, or it was very delusional type of sparring. You know, like they just go at it, but they don't really go at it. Like they're both people are ultra predictable in what they're doing. You know, I'm kind of talking about like sticky hands and you know those Wing Chun drills where they're going back and forth with your hands. They're like, like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. That's what.
Cooperative drill. It would be like if all you did in jiu-jitsu was, you know, cooperative sequences, right? Without ever you know, sparring or even just drilling at a higher level, right? And then you would get really good at essentially doing contact, modern dance improvisation, as opposed to not even improvisation. You get really good at doing sequences, and that's it, right?
Yeah. So
then,
here's the here like if you really want to boil it down to the essence, like I'm thinking, if you don't punch somebody in the face and get punched in the face, or get kicked or kick somebody in the head, and you get kicked in the face, then guess what? That means that you can't fight. It's as simple as that. And for judo, if you haven't thrown anybody or gotten thrown or gotten choked out or gotten armbarred or done it, if you haven't had it done to you and you haven't done it to anybody else, then you can't fight. It's as simple as that. But me, from coming from where I'm coming from, like I'm brown belt currently, but I've been fighting all this time. I've been competing and I've been doing my randoris like at the club and then going out and competing. So by the time I get to my black belt, like I have a really, I got really strong fundamentals in fighting for my sport and like in technique. So that's why now I'm with the big boys. Now I'm like, okay, now the gloves come off. Now we could really play and evolve and focus and narrow down our techniques and specialize and do all kinds of great things and keep on evolving. But for somebody who practices any type of martial art, if you haven't, in my opinion, if you haven't punched people in the head, and you know, and vice versa, yeah, and if you haven't kicked anybody in the head, and vice versa, you haven't thrown anybody, or and vice versa, or you haven't gotten choked out or joint locked, and vice versa, then essentially, yeah, you don't know how to fight, unfortunately.
yeah, man, exactly. But how many martial arts are there out there? And you know, including Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's a bunch of hippy-dippy nonsense in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, to be honest. Like all these upside down spinning whatever nonsense moves that look really cool if you're looking through an Instagram feed and it's a hashtag jiu-jitsu. Oh, look at that helicopter spinning de la worm, whatever it is, right? And it looks cool. But the question is, has anybody ever actually done that in a fight? And the answer is usually no. Or I knew a guy who could do it once. But yeah, but I hear this constantly from you know, martial artists, because they're always giving me feedback, especially on my videos where they ask, is this effective? And if my answer is, in my experience, no, they get mad, of course, because they want to believe that they'll tell me, this is part of my system. My sensei taught me this move, and therefore, because I identify with it, because it's part of my tribe, I have to defend it to the death. Right? And then I'll ask them, have you ever done this in a fight? Have you ever done this against a resisting opponent? Have you ever done this in a sparring session against somebody who wasn't cooperating? And the honest answer is almost always no. In that case, well, then it doesn't work. Not for you anyway. maybe for that one guy who is really strong and really big, and yeah, man. I mean, think about wrist locks, for example. Wrist locks are. I use wrist locks. I like wrist locks. I get caught in wrist locks from time to time when grappling, but I think a lot of people like to romanticize them. And we'll see this a lot with angry Aikido practitioners of the internet. I'm going to pick on them for a minute specifically because they send me a lot of angry messages. I don't have anything against Aikido, to be honest. I think there are a lot of beautiful Aikido techniques that I actually use myself. But they get mad and they will tell me things like, I totally use this technique. Look, here's a video. And then they'll show a video and they're like a 300-pound, just jacked bouncer type of guy picking on little skinny dudes and wrist locking essentially child-sized people. I'm like, well, of course. One thing people don't understand about wrist locks is that to control somebody with a wrist lock, either one, you've got to pin them and gain superior position, which is how it's generally done in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or two, you've got to have great physical strength to an imposing level. Or three, you have to take somebody completely by surprise who has no idea what a wrist lock is. So that's been, yeah, that has been my experience anyway. I know people hate my experience, but that's my experience. I've invested my life into training in martial arts and trying to find the highest reward, lowest risk techniques. And not every technique is at the same level. It's not. I mean, some techniques look cool. Everybody knows this, but not everybody wants to admit it. Some techniques look cool. Some techniques give you style points, if you will, or what that's worth in a fight, which is nothing. But the high percentage stuff is always going to be the high percentage stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's funny that you mentioned that you talk about wrist locks, and I agree 100% with those three things that you said, which is either you're ultra strong relative to the other guy, you caught him off guard, or you got a positional advantage, and okay, now you can crank that lock. But I mean, for the most part, like it's not a high percentage thing. Like, how often are you going to be able to do that in an actual fight? And like, depends on the context too. Like, what exactly is going on? And so yeah, so wrist locks to me, it's like, yeah, you could, like you said, like you get caught in it every once in a while, right? Because either you got caught off guard and the guy just was strong enough to pull it off on you, you know, because you're not a small guy. You're how tall are you?
6'1".
6'1"? And how much you weigh?
In pounds, about 205 pounds right now.
Okay, yeah. So you're not you're not big at. I mean, sorry, you're not small.
I'm not tiny. I'm not tiny.
Yeah. So I mean, for somebody to pull that crap on you, like they must have been either really strong, caught you off guard, or they were in a position where they had a dominant position on you, and then they were able to pull it off, right? And yeah, so, but I mean, for most people, like getting like a lot of martial art nerds. First of all, you're not that strong. Most of these guys aren't that strong because these nerds usually don't even lift weights, unfortunately, right? Because you know they might have that belief that weights slow you down, so they don't lift weights, so they're not strong. And then from there, well, they don't actually have like the skill set to actually get to a dominant position to pull off the wrist lock because they don't actually train fighting. So the only time they would actually be able to pull it off is if they catch a sucker by surprise. Yeah. You know, and somebody who's relatively weaker than them and who doesn't know anything. So I mean, that's the only time they would actually pull it off. So it's a very, but for the most of the time, they're gonna get that technique is not gonna work for them. That's something that they probably maybe should consider. And speaking of wrist locks, you know how you know Rokas, right? Like you did a yes. podcast with him, Martial Arts Journey.
Yes.
So he goes on now, and I love it because he's beefing. You know, he went 180, right? He was like the Aikido guy, believed in it, had his own school, and everything. And then at one point he got Is that the right word? Disillusioned, right?
Yes.
He got disillusioned, and then he went out and he tested it and blah 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 blah, and he tried, I think, for a while to figure out, like, to try to make Aikido work because he
He gave it
invested
the
so
old
much
college
time.
try, man. And
Hmm?
I went through the same process with many of the martial arts systems that I've studied over the years, man. And it's such an important journey for everybody to do. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, so now he's talking about his journey. He's speaking his truth, how we see things, and he's also challenging the Aikido community to essentially send them videos. Like, if they want to argue with him, they have to send him video proof that um, that it works. So there was a guy I found on a video. I think it was today or yesterday. This guy, he was called Dan Wolfman, I believe, and he
Okay.
posted a video. I don't know if Rokas saw it yet, but he tagged Rokas in it, right, to show
Yeah.
him that wrist locks actually work. So this guy is an MMA guy. He does MMA. In the video, you see him in a cage fighting, and what he did is that he had his opponent in the clinch, and it was giving. And so he was clinching. He had his opponent in the clinch. He was kneeing him to death. He was giving him a couple of knees, and because his opponent had his hands, like, over him like that, and he had the inside grip clinching him up like this. So then at one point he slipped off to the side. He grabbed the guy's wrist and then wrist locked him and pivoted at the same time, like Aikido style, and brought him to
Yeah.
the ground. And then, I guess his argument there is that, look, it does work, but even though he was able to pull it off, like, I think, I don't know. What's your opinion on that? Like, I know you didn't see the
Okay.
video yet, but
I didn't see the
he was
video,
able.
but yeah, there's definitely some other factors at play. I mean, this guy is a professional MMA fighter. Obviously, he's athletic, he's strong, and he's also, as you mentioned, kneeing the guy to death first. There was a fight a while back. Was it Rodolfo Vieira? Legendary jiu-jitsu competitor. He has an MMA fight, and he loses. And the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, he loses by submission to a guy who's like a blue belt or a purple belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And Rodolfo Vieira is a legendary black belt. And the Brazilian jiu-jitsu community lost their mind over this. Like, how could a blue belt or a purple belt beat one of the best black belts? It's impossible. We don't understand it. Our minds are blown. So I watched this fight, and basically what happened, here's the play-by-play. The blue belt or purple belt, I'm just going to call him a blue belt. I don't remember his name. The blue belt punches Vieira in the head, then kicks him in the head, then elbows him in the head, and then hits him in the head a number of other times throughout the fight before he submits him. Meaning it's a radically different sport than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Right? When you factor in all these other things that are not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, then, well, we understand it's a different animal. And that's the same thing with this situation you're describing of the guy, the MMA fighter using an Aikido move. I use moves like this all the time while sparring with my students, and it blows their minds. But it's not like how it is taught in Aikido. How it's taught in Aikido is, the guy comes in, extends his arm, you grab that wrist from that cooperative opponent, because there's no sparring in Aikido. And then it just happens, right? But in a fight, what happens? People clinch and they throw punches and they fight and they knee each other to death. And then the guy who is more badly beaten is more prone to submit. This is how fights usually happen. This is how submissions usually happen in MMA. The guy gets beaten up first, and then he gets submitted. It's very difficult to submit a fresh fighter. It's very difficult when both guys are evenly matched. It's very difficult to submit a fresh fighter. And so when we see like a first round submission in the UFC, this is a really impressive feat to pull off. Generally, most of the submissions happen in the second and the third round, because that's after the guy has taken punishment, after he's tired, after he's demoralized, after he's already looking for a way out of the fight, when he's much more willing to give up that arm or stick his neck out a little bit, right? Because in the first round, when everybody's fresh, when everybody is intact, and they're not beaten to a pulp yet, right? They're not going to give up those opportunities. They're not going to give up the wrist, if you will. But again, if you have a guy in the clinch and you are dominating the clinch and you are kneeing him to the point where he is feeling the bad intentions and he wants a way out of that cage, and he's going to start making mistakes, like leaving his hand out there open where you can wrist here. If you don't know, folks at home watching, if you want to learn how to defend a wrist lock, here's a very simple technique. It's called making a tight fist. Seriously, making a tight fist, which is why it's even so much harder to wrist lock somebody in MMA gloves with the hands wrapped. So in one regard, what this guy, what was his name again?
Something Wolfman. I think it might be Dan Wolfman, but I'm not sure.
Okay. This thing that Dan did, in one regard, it's more impressive because it is harder to wrist lock somebody wearing MMA gloves. And then the other hand, from a pure Aikido perspective, less impressive because it's not pure Aikido. It's a dirty, rotten cage fight, right?
Mm. Yeah, that makes me think of while we're on the subject of self-defense moves.
Yeah.
Eye gouging and nut cracking, right? Or
Okay.
kicking the nuts, kicking the grinds. The only time I ever pulled that off is this was when I'm not proud of this, and I'm not gonna go like into too much detail because I'm not sure if I should or not. But essentially, I got into a fight.
Yeah.
This dude was bigger than me, and so my first reaction was okay, So I give him an elbow to the face because I know he wants to go. So I always had this habit of being preemptive, so I would strike first. So I gave him an elbow to the face, and then we started. But he's a big guy; he didn't go down. So we started exchanging blows. So I'm just like walking forward and punching him in the head, and he's there punching me in the head, in the face too. And then at one point, I was able to. I surprised him. I kicked him in the face, and after I kicked him in the face, he was still coming forward, but he was a little bit dazed. And that's when I had both thumbs in his eyeballs, and then I pushed it in. I pushed it in, but then he moved. So like my left thumb actually went inside the socket, but he was moving. And then he moved, and my thumb ended up in his mouth. And then he tried to bite off my thumb, and I ripped my thumb out, and I still have the scar until today, right here. And then from there, he fell down on the ground. And no, I think we ended up in a grappling scenario. And this is when I didn't know how to fight. All I had as a background back then was there was no grappling. There was just my Taekwondo. That's why I managed to kick him in the face. And there was I wouldn't consider Kung Fu. I don't think Kung Fu helped me at all in that situation. So I had my Taekwondo, and I had a little bit of some self-defense stuff that I did along the way. So then, anyways, after that eye gouge, with my two thumbs going in. Well, I tried to get the two thumbs inside, but only the left one went inside, and then he slipped out of it, and it ended up in his mouth. He tried to bite my thumb off. I ripped it off. It was bleeding. I still had the scars. We end up in a grappling situation, and then we end up falling on the floor. So then we're on the floor, but my head is near his crotch. So that's when I started punching his crotch. So those are the only two times that I ever pulled off the gouging somebody's eyes out. I didn't gouge. I didn't take out his eye, but I shoved it in there, and then I grind striked him, but I didn't kick him in the grind. I was punching his grind because I was already on the ground with my head next to his crotch.
Well,
so I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story here.
Psychologically, to do that.
Well, it was kind of a life and death situation. So that's why I'm not going to tell you the end of the story on camera because it might. I'm not sure if it would get me in trouble or not. But suffice to say that I was actually fighting two guys. So while I was beating up on the bigger guy, the smaller guy was smashing bottles on my head. So I think I must have gotten 2-3 bottles on my head while I was attacking the bigger dude. But all that to say that I literally had to elbow the guy in the face, punch him a couple of times, kick him in the face, and then I was able to actually get my thumbs like near his eyes.
Basically, just to get to the dirty moves, you had to fight just to get to that position.
Yeah, and I got like 2 free bottles of beer, like or whatever the hell it was, smashed on my head.
Yeah.
And then I finally all that, and then we finally fell to the ground, and that's when I was able to get like a couple of strikes into his grind.
That is so interesting because, well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, do you remember when Keith Hackney fought Joe Son in the early UFC when there were no rules and groin strikes were still allowed? Like the only deliberate groin strike I remember seeing in those early UFC days where it was still allowed was on the ground. They were tied up. It was like almost like a weird unintentional half guard type of position. And Keith Hackney starts punching Joe Son in the groin like 3 or 4 times. And you could still see like reluctance in his face. Like he wasn't enjoying it. He was like, if I have to, I have to, you know. But it was only because he was kind of in that desperate situation. And it's so interesting that like nobody else did it. And I don't think it's because nobody else thought about it. I'm sure everybody thought about it. Anything goes. The first thing we think about is groin strikes and eye pokes, right? But it's a fight to get into that position. I've had a few students who were Aikido black belts over the years, and one of them, interesting little dude from Greece named Manolis. And Manolis, he comes into the class, he trains for a few months, and after a few months of sparring, he actually manages to pull off one of those flippy dippy Aikido throws on somebody while sparring, like MMA sparring. And afterwards, I say, "Wow, that's really cool. I've never seen anybody do one of those Aikido style flippy dippy throws in real life." And he said, "Yeah, that's the reason I'm taking this class is to learn how to fight. So that because Aikido only works when you already know how to fight." I thought, well, that's so interesting. And essentially what you're saying is dirty moves only know when you already know, or the dirty moves only work when you already know how to fight. And I think that's absolutely true. If you don't know anything about position, how are you going to get in position to poke someone in the eye? If you don't know anything about position, how are you going to get in position to groin strike or any of these other dirty moves, if you will? And a lot of people say, well, I would just drop a 12-6 elbow on his back. Okay, how are you going to get to his back if you don't know how to fight? Right? Position first, then attack. The old Pedro Sauer adage, man. It's true in jiu-jitsu. It's true in self-defense. It's true in all aspects of combat.
But see, that's the thing too, and that was actually one of my next videos for my channel is talking about like self-defense moves, specifically the eye gouging and the grind strikes. Like those things only work if you actually know how to fight, like you said. So you have to be able to well, to set it up. That's the hard
part. Or if you totally
part.
surprise someone, or if you overwhelm them with strike, just like the wrist lock. It's like the same strategy as the wrist lock, or really any of those Aikido moves, right? You got to know how to fight, or take people by surprise, or just be physically imposing.
Yeah,
or
so
some combination of those three.
So it's practically like you have to be already beating them to a pulp before you could actually use those self-defense moves. But then at that point, it's not even self-defense anymore. It's just, well, then just learn how to fight, and those things actually take care of itself. Like it's very easy for me to, like, if I was getting into a so-called altercation, a street fight, so to speak, like it's not the first thing I'm gonna be thinking about. Like eye gouging and kicking his nuts. I'm gonna be like, okay, how am I gonna like essentially knock this guy out or throw him on his head? And once I do that, I will decide from there. Like from there, I could decide to do all the nasty stuff, all the so-called, I could rip off his ear if I want. I could, I could poke his eyeballs out. I could bite him or whatever, or I could smash his nuts to pieces. Or I could snap his neck. The whole neck snapping thing. Yeah, but essentially you got to beat the crap out of the guy first, and then after that you could essentially self-defense move but then you're essentially like permanently injuring the guy or killing him, and that's no longer self-defense. So for me,
Yeah.
self-defense is kind of like a funny way of thinking about it. It's like there is no such thing as self-defense. It's just, to me, I feel as though it's either you know how to fight or you don't. Like self-defense moves,
Here's
it's
a
kind of
question for you. Sorry to interrupt, but I got to ask you this. Do you think you could beat a house cat in a fight?
a house cat.
Yeah. Like if that house cat was just went wild and feral and had bad intentions toward you, do you think you could beat that house cat in a fight?
Oh man, that's a scary thought. Like not without taking a lot of not without taking damage.
Yeah. So yesterday, Gary Tonin proposed this question on Instagram, and I thought it was so fascinating, especially the responses. And that same day, my friend Nils, also known as Captain Krav Maga, on my YouTube channel, sent me a list of animals that people, like a study people, I'm stuttering a lot today. There was a study some scientists did. Apparently, they had a lot of downtime. What animals most people believe that they could beat in a fight, right? And house cat was kind of at the bottom. But Gary Tonin is proposing this idea that 9 times out of 10, the average guy would lose a fight to a wild house cat. And so I start reading the comments, and everyone's like, "No, Gary, you're wrong. House cats are wimpy. I'm a big, strong man." And Gary says, "All right, how do you beat that cat?" And the guys spell out like, "Oh, I would just grab it and smash it or wring its neck or something." And Gary asks, like, "Okay, how are you going to grab the cat?" And these guys, it gives them some pause, and I start thinking about this. Well, cats are incredibly fast, especially over short distances. House cats are way faster than humans. And if you try to catch a cat that doesn't want to be caught, that's a very difficult thing, man. I had a bunch of pet cats when I was a kid, and it was my job. My mother would always task me with the arduous task of throwing all the cats outside from time to time. And man, catching those things when they don't want to be caught is difficult. And if they want to fight you, if they stick out their claws and their teeth, as well as just running away from you and hiding and becoming difficult to catch, that just compounds the problem. And I started thinking about this more and more. Okay, so you have an animal as small as a 12-pound house cat that has these claws and these teeth and this superhuman agility that's far beyond what any human can have, and they can jump like 10 feet in the air very quickly. And if they don't want you to catch them, you won't catch them. If they don't want you to touch them, you won't touch them. So why am I bringing this up? It's very similar to the subject we're just talking about. Like if you want to use the dirty moves, you have to be able to actually get to the other guy first. You've got to be able to touch him, right? You've got to be able to control him. And the same thing with the cat. It's easy to imagine controlling a docile, friendly cat that sits on your lap and purrs, right? But if you've ever had experience with a feral cat that doesn't like you, and maybe a rabid animal that wants to scratch and bite you, you quickly learn that winning a fight isn't about killing the other person. It's about being the one who forces the other one to back down and submit. And if this wild animal can rapid fire machine gun claw you and then get in and out very quickly to the point where you decide it's not worth it anymore, it has just won that fight.
That's deep. That's deep because my first thought is that okay, I would have to wait until the cat jumps on me and attacks me. I'd have to grab and then it would jump on me and would probably catch me in the face, and I would yank it off, hold it super tight, and then from there I would like make, I guess, either try to snap its neck or or smash it against the wall. But I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
like if a
PETA
cat
is officially your enemy now, my friend.
the what?
PETA is now against you, my friend.
Oh, okay. I thought you said the internet because, and then I just thought of there was a Netflix special, Netflix series. It was called "Don't F with Cats,"
Yeah. Oh,
and it was
interesting.
regarding. Yeah, you never heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's regarding this serial killer in Montreal. Actually, this is where he did a lot of murdering and all that. I think he murdered like a couple of
Right.
people. But anyways, essentially what he did is that he got attention from people by torturing cats, and he was filming it, and he posted it on the internet. And because of that, um, he got his so-called claim to fame because he was, obviously a psychopath serial killer. So he wanted to be
Yeah.
caught, he wanted to be known, and his way about it was, torturing cats. That's how he started
Oh
out.
man,
He
that's
was posting
terrible.
videos periodically, yeah, of don't watch it. It's a terrible, like, it's
Yeah.
just not a good thing to put in your psyche, like watching like 10 episodes of this crap. Nah, don't do it. But all that to say that when you said that's what I thought you said. I thought you said that, like, oh, now the internet is your enemy because
No, PETA,
you just
the people for the ethical treatment of animals.
oh, okay, yeah,
Um,
but this is like, just
it's hypothetical. I know. I'm just joking.
hypothetical.
Just joking. Um,
Man.
but yeah, man. I mean, think about it. Like, think about a lion for a minute. You know, the lion, the king of the jungle. Not really. They live in the savannah. They live in open grasslands, not the jungle. But why do we even say lions are the king of the jungle? Anyway, what do lions eat? We think of lions eating zebras and gazelles, and yeah, they do. But when they can't find one, what do they eat? Because lions often spend long periods of time without having anything to eat, and they walk around in like a near starvation state a lot, especially
Mm,
the lions who live solo without the pride as a support system. So the solo lions, they can't take down a big animal by themselves. And so what they end up eating a lot of the times is a porcupine, those African porcupines. And this is really interesting, especially if you watch a video of lions hunting porcupines, because it is like their last resort. And the lion, before it hunts the porcupine, it stares at it for about 30 minutes. It just sits there and stares, thinking, how hungry am I again? Do I really want to do this? Oh, this is going to hurt. This is going to suck. And you see this look on the lion's face of, I don't want to do this, but I have no other options. I am so hungry. I have to do it. And then and sometimes the lions lose. Sometimes they lose that fight against the porcupine. They run in there, they try to bite it, they get a face full of quills, and they're like, screw this, I'm done, I've had enough. And the porcupine wins a lot of the time. But even when the lion wins and eats the porcupine, it gets that same punishment. It gets a face full of quills. It's in pain for months afterward. It's scarred for life. And this is such a fascinating analogy for fighters. I think I always uh, use this as an analogy when people tell me like, "Yeah, I want to be a fighter." I'm like, "Do you really though? How hungry are you? You know, are you as hungry as a lion that hasn't eaten in a month, staring at a porcupine, trying to decide whether or not it wants to chase that meal? I don't know. How hungry are you?" But yeah, man, winning a fight, yeah, it's it's about more than just beating the other guy into a pulp.
But
Um, yeah,
all this talk about like self-defense and like winning fights, these people are always asking like, what's the best martial art for self-defense and all that. I feel as though, like, when you ask that question, because I used to be like this too, like run these scenarios in my head. What would I do if I get into an altercation? I would do this, I would do that. But me, like, I was actually in street gangs in my late teens, and after that uh, yeah, in my late teens actually. I was in gangs, and I was actually fighting a lot in bars, but it was always brawls. It was like 10 on 5 or 5 on 1 or crazy stuff like that, or just like all out like chaos, everybody just smashing bottles and throwing chairs around type of stuff, right? So,
yeah,
but all that to say that, like, and then throughout my 20s and even up until for the longest time, I've always had this, oh, self defense mentality where, oh, if this would happen, I would do this, I would do that, and. But the truth is, like, how often are you planning on getting into street fights?
good
And and
question.
and here's the thing, like, where are you hanging out to always be getting into fights? Are you hanging out in bars? Is that what you're doing? You're drinking and then you're getting drunk and you're picking fights with people and you're just waiting for it to happen, or are you in a neighborhood that's so bad that you're essentially you know, getting robbed or getting, you know, like that's why this mentality. I think that it might stem from people being bullied, so they want to train something to get that self confidence in case something happens. But the truth is, how often is it really going to happen? If it's even going to happen in your lifetime.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this so that people don't actually go out and train. They should, because the truth is, if you spend all your time training, guess what? You're not partying in bars. You're not hanging around at after hours. You're
Yeah.
not there, you know, doing doing you know, dirty business that might get you implicated in these kind of stories. You know, so
Exactly. And you're developing moral character that helps you become the type of person that people don't want to beat up. Not
yeah,
because you're big and scary, but because you develop social skills and you're able to interact in a positive way with people.
yeah, that's it. So that's why like these. It's not that I sometimes I get I find it funny that I get tired of seeing the same questions because I'm like, do you live in some kind of war zone, some kind of ghetto where like, you know, people
I
are
know.
literally dying, like every day you're seeing like 2, 3 people getting killed in the street. There's fights happening everywhere. Uh, Like, is that what it is? You know, like what's big, you know, this big obsession with you know, self-defense.
Yeah.
And I think that people just kind of let their imagination go wild a little bit, right? Because they get
No, man.
bullied and they feel
It's,
that, oh, next time I don't ever want this to happen to me anymore. And then they start watching videos on YouTube on self-defense and this and that, and they just go a little bit off the rails, and it's just in their imagination that it's actually happening, but it's actually
yeah.
not happening. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. You know, I actually have seen people killed in the street in front of me. Like, I spent a couple of years in Argentina, in the, they call them Villas de Miseria. It means village of misery. They're like these basically ghettos, just ghettos made out of garbage. Um, very high crime rates. I was there in the 90s, like right before the economic collapse. Um, Back in 2000, I was there from like 97 to 99. Anyway, so I actually saw people get killed in front of me. I saw people shot in the street. I saw horrible acts of violence. But at the same time, do you know how many street fights I got into in Argentina? Zero. Do you know how many street fights I've got into as an adult? Zero. Do you know how many street fights I anticipate getting into in my life? Zero. And why is that? It's not because violence doesn't exist. It's not because violent people aren't out there. It's not because people don't get killed in the streets. It's because I choose not to participate in that. And I know when I say things like that, people are like, "Oh, well, I don't have that option." You know, violence follows me around. I, you know, if you get in a couple of street fights in your life, all right, that's understandable. Sometimes violence is unavoidable, sometimes. But if you've been in a lot of street fights, it's because you're the jerk starting those fights. Man, do you ever see those ads? I don't know if they still pop up, but for the longest time, every like martial arts themed channel got this ad from this dude with this fake name, John Black. He's like, "Let me teach you my secret street fighting system that will allow you to win a fight as easily as sneezing in just like 2 easy lessons, and it has nothing to do with MMA or boxing or whatever." And it was the stupidest ad. It was from this. Uh, anyway, it was all fake, basically. If you actually bought the program and looked at it, it's just the same basic self-defense nonsense everybody teaches. But this guy claimed to have forced himself to get into 600 street fights in order to learn how to fight, to develop this unquestionable system of self-defense. And I was like, okay, if you get into 600 street fights, you are the problem. You are the problem, not the other guys. You are the people. I mean, you are the one that people are afraid of. You are the one that people worry about. You are the boogeyman, basically. Don't be that guy.
Yeah, and you know, like you made a really good point there. Like I think that in regards to Like if you're always getting into fights, it's because you're essentially the problem. And so I believe in, now that I think about it, I believe in learning how to fight with the intention of always avoiding the fight at all costs, because it's just not worth it. You know, yes, so it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a battlefield. I don't know if you ever heard that term, right?
Yes.
So the whole point of learning to fight is really a question of self-mastery and self-discipline, and it's actually to avoid the fight. It's not to get into the fight, if that makes any sense. And I think that's a better approach. So, yeah,
that makes perfect sense.
So for all the self-defense guys, the martial art guys who are worried about self-defense, like don't think about fighting. Learn how to fight and then just avoid it at all costs. If ever it happens, well, you'll have the tools and the skill set, you know, but chances are if you spend a lot of time training, like you do, like I do, like a lot of guys who are you know, really heavy into combat sports, you're not going to have the time to fight, and you're not going to, you know, like, cause you'll be too busy training, and then you'll be, you know, living your life and doing good things, as opposed to hanging around in bars or hanging around with criminals or whatever, you know, and then getting into that kind of trouble.
Listen, Hong, how many people die every year from bad guys jumping out of the shadows? It happens, but it's not a huge number. All right, now let's contrast that number. How many people die every year of heart disease and stroke?
Huge.
That's the #1 killer of humans on planet Earth. What is the biggest preventative measure you can take against heart disease and stroke?
Stay fit.
Yes.
Exercise.
Exercise. Yes. Okay. What do you do when you get out there and train in martial arts? You're exercising. That is the best self-defense there is. I hate the self-defense industry because they're pointing their fingers in the wrong direction at the wrong enemy. They're pointing their fingers at the imaginary boogeyman around, hiding in the shadows, right? The imaginary ninjas that will jump out on the streets and punch you in the groin. Most of the time that doesn't happen. The way most people are probably going to die is heart failure or a stroke.
Car accident.
And yeah, car accidents are up there too, man. Cancer, all of these things that they're not glorious, they're not romanticized. It's just they're boring ways to die, if you will, if there is such a thing as a boring way to die. But the best measures to prevent those things: fitness, exercise, you know, these basic things we talked about at the beginning. We spent a lot of time talking about, like, man, you look so young. You look young. We're not young. We're just fit, right? Are we prime candidates for heart disease? Well, I certainly hope not. Not according to statistics. Why? Because we exercise. Why do we exercise? Well, because we're martial artists, right? It's what martial artists do. But ultimately, the prime enemy that we're fighting, that we're defending ourselves from, is that heart disease and stroke and other lifestyle-related illnesses, by not having that lifestyle that is conducive to those diseases. So now, nothing makes you invincible. The end goal isn't live forever, because that's impossible. But man, if you can have a life like my 80-year-old friend that I sparred in Jiangsu province back in the day, if he's still alive today, he would be 92. I don't know if he is, but if you can have a life like him, where you can do backflips at the age of 80, imagine that man's quality of life. Right? Imagine that for a minute. If you had that type of mobility and strength all the days of your life, and you never had to worry about, oh man, what if I end up in an old folks home attached to a ventilator or something like that?
Yeah,
Man,
yeah.
that's peace of mind. That is real peace of mind.
But that man is impressive, because the thing is, it's not just the feats that he did, right, in terms of the backflip and the way he was able to fight. I mean, it's just for him to be able to have kept that up all that time. What kind of mindset he must have had, you know? in my opinion, a quality mindset, you know, a very positive and good mindset for his own
Yeah.
life, because he had to see life in a way where he had to stay young mentally and open and always learning and always progressing to be able to maintain that skill level, well, to increase that skill level and to maintain that physicality and those things that he was able to do with his body. So
Yeah.
I think a big part of what he did was really impressive in terms of uh, like the mental game, the mental aspect that drove all his behavior, so that he was still able to get to that point at 80 and do what he did. And on another note, like in terms of, so essentially the self-defense industry is a made-up industry. They're
Yes.
just making up a boogeyman and then trying to sell you a solution.
It is a cure looking for a disease, is what that is. Man, it is the opposite of how medicine or science or any scholarly field is supposed to work. It is a cure looking for a disease, man. Nothing else. I hate the self-defense industry. I absolutely hate it. A lot of people are confused by that because they say, "Don't aren't you a self-defense instructor?" The answer is no, no. I'm a mixed martial arts coach. I teach fighters how to win fights, self-defense. Like, it's the opposite of that. Real self-defense, as far as if you are confronted with danger on the streets or whatever, real self-defense is remove yourself from the danger, right? I mean, think about our base human instincts for self-preservation. If there is a threat coming at you, we generally respond one of four ways. The primary one is we tend to freeze. Nobody ever talks about that. Well, few people do. But we tend to freeze, hoping that the danger will just go away. And sometimes it does, because if you make sudden movements around certain dangerous animals, they'll jump on you. If you don't move, a lot of them will just kind of look at you and sniff you and walk on. Right. So that actually is there is an evolutionary advantage to freezing, giving yourself pause to assess the situation. Basically, don't do anything stupid. Okay. But then if something's lunging at us and lurching at us right away, our instincts are basically three things. Either one, try to run away from the danger, get away, move ourselves as far away from that danger as possible. Right? It's not good for winning fights, but it is good for self-preservation. The second thing is try to push the danger away from you. And the third thing is grab that danger as tightly as you can and hold it as tightly as you can so it can't move and hurt you. So those are the three instincts we have as far as being untrained. And you'll see this a lot in street fights as well. Um, you know, how many street fights go like this? It always starts with escalation. Two guys get mad at each other. It escalates. They push each other. It could have stopped at any point before it even got to the push. If somebody just said, "Hey, man, you're right. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Let me get out of your way," I think most people would be, "Wow, I like this guy. I don't want to fight him. I want to be his friend." Because how many people get told, "I'm wrong, you're right" in their life? Most people never have that experience. Most people go through their lives feeling disrespected all the time. And so if somebody, man, I remember one of my students a few years back, there was this young woman taking my class, and I remember I was wrong about something. And I told her, I'm wrong and you're right. And I apologized. And her eyes lit up. She was like, "Say that again, please. I've never heard those words before in my life before." And she was like taken aback. I was like, "I'm wrong and you're right in this situation, and I apologize." And she was like, "Wow." And those words commanded so much respect from her from that moment on. And like if you want to command respect, you have to show respect. And that's one of these street lessons people need to know. I have a friend. My friend Angelo, I did a podcast with him. He lives in Japan, but he grew up in Southern California, and he had a bunch of run-ins with gangs back in the day. And he told me something very interesting, which is that on the streets, gangs operate in the currency of respect, and it's not so much about who can beat up who, but who shows respect to whom. And that's very very interesting how, in order to essentially get out of situations that would have otherwise got him killed, by showing a certain level of respect to certain people, he was able to survive. And we can carry that same thing not just in the streets, but in everyday life. Like, show people respect in order to get that respect, so that the fight never happens. But when it does happen, what happens? They push, right? They're trying to push each other, right? Keep that dangerous far away from you as possible. And then they throw their awkward haymakers. And then what do? They latch onto each other in a schoolyard bully headlock. They hold the danger as close as possible, tumble on the ground, and hope their friends break them apart, giving them a face-saving exit so they can leave with a semblance of respect in their lives. Because at the end of the day, that's all they want is feeling respected. And when people are calling each other out on the internet, I'm better than you, I'm a better fighter than you, all they want is a piece of respect. All they want is somebody saying, hey, you matter too. You're a real person just like me. Anyway, that got a little preachy, but my camera is about to run out of battery. So any other questions or topics you would like to address before we wrap up this podcast, my friend?
Yeah. Like, well, first off, I want to say, like, thank you very much for, taking the time to, to have me on your podcast. It was great, honestly. First time, and, I got a podcast with somebody that I enjoy watching a lot and that I respect a lot. So thank you very much for that. So I got a last question for you. What's your take on gym cleanliness? Like, how
Jim
much?
Clement. Oh, super
Yeah.
important, man. That's like when. So you were asking me earlier, like, what should a fighter look for in a gym? Number one, cleanliness. Because, man, here's a precautionary tale. If you want to be grossed out and have PTSD, Google Kevin Randleman staph infection. The late great Kevin Randleman got a staph infection on his side that opened up a giant, it's flesh-eating bacteria, and it starts out small, like little red bumps or something like that, and it can kill you, and it has killed people. And Kevin Randleman, like, you can see the inside of his abdominal cavity from that. It's gross, man. So that just starts with a bacteria. Staphylococcus, it grows in the human nasal cavity. In here, it's harmless, but out there, when it gets into an open wound or a scratch or a scrape or something like that, which is really common when you're training, and you don't clean that off afterward, it can cause a horrible infection. That's just one little thing. Then you got annoying things like ringworm and other funguses. Germs can kill you, man. They can kill you. It's not just unpleasant, it's not just gross, it's not just smelly. They can actually kill you. So the best coaches that I know, the best coaches, right? They're not the guys who get the most attention. They're not the guys who train the best fighters. They're the guys who mop the mats themselves, not because they can't afford to get somebody else to do it, but because they want to make sure that they are clean. They want to make sure that everybody is safe. They ensure the safety of their fighters above all else. And if your gym is not clean, that means they do not care about your safety and well-being. I mean, that is one of the most important things. So, yeah, look for that. Make sure they clean and disinfect the mats first thing in the morning and after training is done. Or best case scenario, after every training session. If you can mop those mats and disinfect them after every training session, that's ideal.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Also, wash your belts. I know a lot of martial artists don't do this and they think belts are magical. It's part of the uniform. You're going to sweat on that thing. You're going to get bacteria on it. I don't know if you're one of those guys who doesn't wash your belt, but if not, repent of your wicked ways and wash your belt. It's part of your uniform. You wouldn't just not wash your rash guard or not wash your gi or wash your gym shorts, right? Why would you not wash your belt? Wash that too. Wash that too. I'm
You
a
know,
stickler about that.
the only reason why I stopped washing my belts, because when I got my first yellow belt in judo, I washed it so much it turned white. So then my coaches were like, "You're a dumbass. You shouldn't wash your belt." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? Doesn't it get sweating on it?" They're like, "No, it doesn't get sweat on it. Like you wear
Of
it like
course
on
it
the outside."
does. Of course. Now, if you're worried about that, there are other ways to wash your belt. Like you can soak it in a disinfectant solution and just hang out to dry. You don't have to stick it in a like a machine washer dryer thing that can potentially damage or discolor it. Right? Make sure that thing's clean. There are very simple solutions to clean a belt without damaging it.
Okay, gotcha. No, I repent and I will wash my belt because now that I understand the importance of it and that sweat actually does get into it, which I kind of knew, but I kind of decided I wanted to believe that I could get away with it.
I mean, yeah,
But
think about it. Right now, we're living in a world where so many people in so many countries are running around with masks and terrified of invisible germs in the air all around us that can kill
Mhm.
us, and they're still not washing their belts. And I'm like, why not? Why not?
I'm a moron. Like, yeah, so it's okay. I don't pretend to be a smart guy. I probably look smarter than I actually am because maybe people look at me and I'm Asian and they're like, "Oh yeah, you must be good at math or something." But I actually not very good at.
Oh
But
man,
so listen, thank you very much for your time, man. We've been going on
you're
for like
very
4 hours
welcome.
now.
This is one of the longest podcasts I've done. Not the
Yeah,
longest though. Not the longest.
not really,
But
man.
I enjoyed it, man.
Hours.
I enjoyed talking to you, my friend. All right,
Okay, yeah,
Pone,
me
thank you
too.
so much. All right, shout out once again to OG Fitness. Please go check out his channel. We'll put links in the description down below. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.
Thank you, sir.